Chapter 103. Morning of the second day, Fergus Castle. A huge living room with an area of 200 square meters was filled with people in battle gear. Viscount Fergus sat at the head of the table. On his left was Baron Ricardo, Egbert Ricardo, and on his right was Baron Kipling, Gardner Kipling. 6 men of different ages sat on both sides of the table. They were the other 6 lords of Viscount Fergus's territory, apart from Lord Linda. Behind everyone's seats, there were some young people in battle attire standing. Behind Viscount Fergus were naturally Grey, Bernal, Elise, and Caroline. Behind Baron Ricardo was his eldest son, Ian Ricardo, whom Grey had seen before, and another young man whom he had never seen before. Behind Baron Kipling was a young man and another young man. Grey had seen both of them in his territory last time, but he had never interacted with them. Behind the other 6 lords, there was a person, either a youth or a young man. It wasn't that there was only one heir in these lords' families. It was because the cost of implanting a bloodline was too expensive. Even if there were several heirs in the family, they would usually only implant a bloodline in the eldest son. The 2 Baron families were much better. As long as there were heirs, they would be implanted with a bloodline and given the opportunity to practice blood techniques. The Fergus family was much better than the Baron family. Even Caroline, who was a woman, was given the opportunity to practice blood techniques. There were a total of 23 people in the room. These were all the people who practiced blood techniques in Viscount Fergus's territory. I'm sure you all know the details. Since the beginning of winter, there have been frequent incidents of wild beasts attacking villages. If this continues, I'm worried that there will be riots among the civilians. That's why I'm preparing to clear out the forests near the villages where the wild beasts frequently attack. Viscount Fergus's gaze swept across the nobles and their descendants. The wild beasts are not a threat to the people present, so in order to speed up, I've divided the team into 3 teams. Baron Ricardo, Baron Kipling, and I will each lead one team. We'll move in 3 directions. My Fergus family will form a team with the Harry family to clear out the Black Earth Forest. The Ricardo family, the Corgi family, the Cullen family, and one person from the Carter family will form a team to clear out the Black River Forest. The Kipling family, the Rockney family, the Cuff family, and one person from the Carter family will form a team to clear out the Pine Forest. All right, time is of the essence. Let's go now. Yes, Viscount. The 2 barons and 6 lords all stood up. Soon, the 3 groups left Fergus Castle in 3 different directions. Tap, tap, tap. On the snowy ground to the south of the territory, more than 10 horses were galloping. The hot air coming out of their noses was like the smoke coming out of the mouth of a smoker. Because the ground was covered in snow, their speed was not fast. At most, it was only half of their usual speed. This team was made up of 5 people from the Fergus family, 2 people from the Harry family, and a few soldiers in charge of logistics. Young Master Bernal, young Master Elise, Miss Caroline, young Master Grey. The 2 people from the Harry family who were assigned to the Fergus family were the father, Lunt Harry, and the son, Vic Harry. Both father and son were slightly chubby. As soon as the team set out, Vic Harry, who was in his early 20s, started to get close to Grey and the other 3. He obviously didn't want to miss this opportunity to interact with the younger generation of the Fergus family. Bernal responded with a smile. Elise didn't even care. Caroline's face was cold, and Grey was neither too close nor too distant. He sat on the red blood fledgling that Viscount Fergus gave to him. After 4 months, the red blood fledgling had grown up again. It was now almost 4 meters tall. After riding for about an hour, the team arrived at the Black Earth Forest that they were in charge of. The 7 of us will enter the forest from 7 different directions. Finally, we will meet in the center. If we see any beasts, we will kill them immediately. Bernal will enter from here, and Grey will enter from here. Viscount Fergus took out a detailed map of the entire territory of the Viscount's territory. On it was the clear outline of the Black Earth Forest. Viscount Fergus pointed around the Black Earth Forest on the map and arranged the directions for everyone to enter. After arranging the directions for everyone to enter, he said with a slightly serious expression, Although it shouldn't be a problem for you to deal with normal beasts with your strength, you still have to be careful. The Black Earth Forest is the largest forest out of the three, and it is also the place where beasts attack the villages most frequently. You have to be vigilant. Yes, father. Yes, Viscount. After answering, the 7 of them began to disperse. Gray rode on the red blood horse and led a soldier around the Black Earth Forest. After half a circle around the Black Earth Forest, they arrived at the east side, where Viscount Fergus had arranged for them to enter. After handing the red blood horse to the soldier, he began to enter the Black Earth Forest. The reason why the Black Earth Forest was called the Black Earth Forest was because the soil here was completely black, hence the name Black Earth Forest. But at this moment, all he could see was white. The trees were white, the ground was white. This was a world of ice and snow. When he stepped on the ground, the depth of the snow was more than 10 centimeters. Half of his calf had sunk into the snow. Luckily, he was wearing long boots that reached his knees, so the snow didn't seep into his shoes. Such deep snow is indeed not suitable for normal soldiers to encircle and suppress beasts. Gray shook his head, lifted his foot from the snow, and continued to move forward. If it was a normal soldier, half of his calf sunk into the snow, it would be difficult to even walk, let alone encircle and suppress beasts. It was more likely that they would become food for the beasts. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Stepping on the thick snow, Glenn went deeper into the Black Earth Forest. From time to time, snow would fall from the branches, but he easily dodged them. He went in about a few hundred meters. Bang! Just as Gray passed by a tree, the snow beside the tree suddenly exploded. Then, a white figure suddenly jumped out and pounced on him. The white figure was about 2 meters long and 1.5 meters tall. Its body was covered in snow-white fur, and its limbs and torso were extremely sturdy. It was a tiger with white fur. Roar! The distance of 4 to 5 meters was covered by the white tiger in a single leap. The ferocious tiger opened its mouth wide, and Gray could even smell the stench. Bang! Gray stomped on the snow with one foot, and the snow splashed in all directions. Suddenly, a small snow pit appeared, and he used the recoil force to retreat, dodging the white tiger's pounce and brushing past it. Clang! Just as Gray and the white tiger brushed past each other, Gray unsheathed his long sword, and a cold white light flashed, and the sword slashed down on the white tiger's neck. Puff! A ferocious head flew up, and cherry-red blood gushed out, splattering in all directions from a wound. The surrounding snow and trees were full of spots of red, like beautiful red flowers in the snow. More than 10 meters away, Gray, who did not have a trace of blood on him, turned around and looked at the white tiger's still twitching body and the head that had fallen and rolled a few times on the ground. When the blood splattered, he had already moved away, avoiding the splashing blood. If it was an ordinary soldier, I'm afraid he would have died just now. Because of the cover of the snow, the white tiger's attack was too sudden. It suddenly sprang out from the snow less than 5 meters away from Gray, and with a leap, it had already pounced in front of Gray. If it was an ordinary soldier who had been attacked, he would not have been able to react at all. Even if he had reacted, because his feet were deep in the snow, it would have been difficult for him to escape the white tiger's pounce. Just a few hundred meters in, and I've already encountered a wild beast. No wonder the villages near the Black Earth Forest are the most frequently attacked by wild beasts. It's a pity that such a big tiger, probably 400 to 500 pounds, can't be brought away. Shaking his head, Gray continued to move forward deeper into the Black Earth Forest. He did not have the slightest distance with the wild beasts in the Black Earth Forest. Even if there were many wild beasts in the Black Earth Forest, his expression did not change at all. Even Elise and Caroline, who were only low-level blood warriors, would not have a hard time dealing with these wild beasts, let alone him, who was already an upper-level blood warrior. Pu. Gray would be attacked by wild beasts almost every 100 meters he advanced. It was clear that there were many wild beasts in the Black Earth Forest. This is not normal. Why are there so many wild beasts? As he killed, Gray's eyebrows slowly raised. In a short journey of over a mile, he had actually encountered no less than 10 large hunting wild beasts. If Viscount Fergus and the others had encountered the same thing as him. That meant that there were at least 70 large, hunting wild beasts in this forest. For forests like the Black Earth Forest, there were really too many. Moreover, with so many large hunting wild beasts, even in spring and summer, when food was at its most abundant, it might not be able to provide for so many large hunting wild beasts, much less in winter. But in spring and summer, other than Gohorn Village being chased away by Hanhu, the villages near the Black Earth Forest had not been attacked. Chapter 104. At this moment, Gray wasn't the only one who had noticed the abnormality in this situation. Whether it was Viscount Fergus, Lord Harry, Bernal, or Caroline, they all vaguely sensed the abnormality. Creak, creak. Although they already sensed the abnormality, they still needed to continue the slaughter. Gray continued to go deeper. Puff, puff. After killing a few more large hunting beasts and passing through the gaps between a few trees, the scene in front of Gray suddenly changed. There's a house in this forest. A wooden house appeared in front of Gray in an eerie manner. It was a wooden house that only covered an area of about 100 square meters. The height was only about 3 meters. It was very ordinary, but also very unusual. After all, this was a wooden house that was built in a forest where wild beasts ran rampant. Was it built by a hunter from a nearby village? Gray slightly raised his eyebrows and guessed. After a slight hesitation, he slowly approached the wooden house. Because the appearance of the wooden house was too strange, he paid attention and tried his best not to make too much noise as he approached the wooden house. 30 meters, 20 meters. He was getting closer and closer to the wooden house. Suddenly, his pupils shrank. The windows of the wooden house were blocked by solid wooden planks, so he couldn't see what was going on inside. The door of the wooden house was also closed, but he actually saw a few clear footprints in the snow at the entrance of the wooden house. Someone's here. Leaving such clear footprints meant that someone must have visited this place not long ago. And this person was definitely not Viscount Fergus and the others. Judging from the distance, there was still a distance to the center. No one else should have passed through here. Schwa! At that moment, a large number of green branches suddenly sprouted from the bare trees that were covered in snow near Gray. They quickly attacked Gray from all directions. Whoosh! Sensing the movement, Gray's hair stood up. He poured the power of blood into his legs and suddenly stepped back. With the wind wolf bloodline in his body, his movement speed was already extremely fast, much faster than that of an ordinary upper-level blood warrior. After being enhanced by the power of blood, his movement speed increased by another level. Poof, poof, poof. The branches pierced through the snow like sharp arrows, creating holes in the snow. Relying on the blood force to increase his movement speed, Gray narrowly dodged the branch before it could pierce him. He retreated more than 20 meters away. Looking at the place where he was standing before, there was a lingering fear in his eyes. The green branches were like green arrows, riddling the place where he had been standing with holes. If he had dodged a little slower, his body would have been riddled with holes. Although he was wearing the iron rhino inner armor, his head, hands, and feet were not protected. Creak, creak. The sound of feet stepping on the snow was heard. A man wearing a white cloak walked out from under the cover of a tree and looked in Gray's direction. This was a skinny man with a mustache on his face. His skin was slightly tanned, and he could be in his 40s or 50s. His eyes were very cold. When he looked at people, his eyes were full of indifference. Ferocious blood warrior. Gray had already unsheathed his long sword and held it in his hand. He looked at the skinny man cautiously. To be able to use the ability of blood fiends, he was at least a ferocious blood warrior. If the other party was an existence that surpassed the ferocious blood warrior, then it was absolutely impossible for him to escape from the other party's ability. Therefore, the other party's ability was very likely that he was a ferocious blood warrior. Boy, you actually kill my pets? The skinny man looked at Gray coldly. Pets? Seeing that the other party had no intention of attacking, Gray naturally did not dare to act blindly without thinking in front of a ferocious blood warrior. He asked with uncertainty, "Are you talking about those large hunting animals?" "Yes, that's them. It seems that you have killed quite a number of my pets." The skinny man's voice was even colder. They attacked the village and killed dozens of villagers. I had no choice but to kill them. Hearing that the man's voice was even colder, Gray cursed in his heart and hurriedly explained. Who are you lying to? To aristocrats like you, would you care about the lives of dozens of civilians? Speak, who are you? Swish, swish, swish. Suddenly, the man attacked once again. On the originally bare trunks of the deciduous trees around Gray, a large number of green branches suddenly grew out and rapidly pierced towards Gray. Swish! His expression changed greatly. Gray hurriedly used the power of blood to increase his movement speed, dodging left and right to avoid these arrow-like green branches. Those that could not be dodged, he would cut them with his sword before they could pierce him. With great difficulty, he managed to avoid the attack of the branches. Boom! However, just as he was about to leave the area covered by the green branches, a skinny fist, like a hammer, came smashing towards his head. Before the fist came close, a biting cold wind had already slapped Gray's face. Gray did not doubt that if he was hit by this fist, his head would immediately burst open. The power of blood once again poured into his legs. His speed soared, and he abruptly moved to the side. After his strength had reached the level of an upper-level blood warrior, the amount of power of blood he could use had increased once again. He had tested that he could now use it about 30 times consecutively. Crack! He dodged, but a deciduous tree behind him, as thick as an adult's thigh, was directly split into two from the middle by this punch. The upper part of the tree collapsed, and a large amount of snow fell from the tree. However, the skinny man had already chased after Gray, and none of the snow fell on his body. Swish! 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 Using the power of blood to increase his movement speed, Gray quickly retreated after moving to the side. But the skinny man's fist was like a sticky candy, sticking tightly to Gray. After all, Gray was only an upper-level blood warrior. Even after using the power of blood, his speed was still slower than that of a ferocious blood warrior. The distance between him and the skinny man was gradually closing. Boom! The fist was already close to his head, and in the next moment, his head would burst open. Naturally, his head was not as hard as the tree just now. He swung the long sword in his right hand at the man, hoping to force him to retreat. But the man nimbly lowered his body, dodging Gray's sword, and continued to punch towards Gray's head. Huff! Looking at the incoming fist, Gray filled his left hand with the power of blood and blocked the man's fist with the greatest force he could muster. Bang! Their fists collided, and a muffled sound rang out. Gray felt his left hand go numb, and his entire body was pushed back by the huge force. He crashed into a tree, and the impact caused the snow on the tree to continuously fall down, covering his entire body. Just like his speed, even after using the power of blood, his strength was still a little weaker than that of a ferocious blood warrior. A ferocious blood warrior needed at least 4 or 5 upper-level blood warriors to be able to contend with him. Whether it was speed or strength, a ferocious blood warrior surpassed an upper-level blood warrior. In addition, a ferocious blood warrior could also use the ability of blood fiends. In fact, 4 or 5 upper-level blood warriors was the minimum requirement. The reason Gray could dodge the skinny man's attacks for so long was that he had both the speed characteristic of the Wind Wolf and the strength characteristic of the Hanhu. Compared to an ordinary upper-level blood warrior, the difference in strength and speed between him and the skinny man was smaller. The skinny man looked at Gray, slightly surprised that his punch did not have the expected effect. He originally thought that this punch would be able to smash Gray's left hand, but the reality was not so. Gray was only pushed back. He could not figure it out, so he did not think too much about it. Bang! The skinny man stomped on the ground, and a hole with a diameter of tens of centimeters appeared in the snow. His entire body shot out, and he quickly pounced on Gray. Whoosh! The power of blood poured into his legs, and they suddenly swelled up. Gray quickly dodged to the side, and he could not help but feel a little anxious. In the exchange, just now, he had already used the power of blood more than 10 times. Now, he only had less than half of it left. Gritting his teeth, he made a decision. Boom! Seeing Gray turn around, The skinny man also turned around nimbly. His fist rumbled as he chased after Gray. Swish! The long sword in Gray's hand swept out. The skinny man retracted his fist and leaned to the side, avoiding the sword. He then took a step forward, and his fist was like a serpent coming out of its hole, smashing straight at Gray. Swish! But at this moment, the long sword in Gray's hand that had already swung out suddenly returned, and slashed at the skinny man's fist with extreme speed. It turned out that the sword that he had swung out just now had already turned back halfway. His sharp combat talent allowed him to see through the skinny man's next move, which was why he turned back so quickly. Even so, it was still very dangerous. However, he did not have much power of blood left, so he could only take the risk. Puff! The longsword struck the skinny man's arm, but it was as if it had struck a cowhide. It only left a wound that was not too deep, and bright red blood dripped from the wound bit by bit. Bastard! The skinny man roared with extreme anger. He did not expect that he would be injured in the hands of an upper-level blood warrior. He felt deeply humiliated. His other fist pierced out like a raging dragon and hammered at Gray. Although Gray had already retreated at extreme speed, he was still not as fast as the skinny man's fist. The skinny man's fist was like an iron hammer that hammered at Gray's chest. Bang! Crack! Gray's figure flew out and crashed into a thick tree. After breaking the tree, he continued to fly backward. Chapter 105. Damn it! After sending Gray flying with a punch, the scrawny man's anger did not diminish. He looked at the wound on his arm, which was still dripping blood. His eyes were ablaze as he glared at Gray, who had crashed into a tree and was sliding down. The fury in his eyes seemed to want to set Gray on fire. He had never imagined that he would be injured by an upper-level blood warrior in a one-on-one fight. Although it was not a serious injury and would heal in a few days at most, a ferocious blood warrior, was injured by an upper-level blood warrior. This made him feel a burning sensation on his face. He was angry, but more than that, he was embarrassed. With a gloomy face, he walked toward Gray. Drops of blood slid down his injured arm and dripped onto the snowy ground. It was as if the fire in his heart was burning. Given the other party's physical fitness as an upper-level blood warrior, he should have lost the ability to resist after receiving his angry punch. He was thinking about how to deal with the other party in order to vent his anger. Whoosh! But at this moment, Gray, who should have been lying on the ground powerlessly, suddenly shot up from the ground and quickly fled backward. His movements were so agile that he did not look like he was injured at all. How can this be? He's wearing inner armor? The scrawny man was puzzled, but the next moment, he immediately thought of the reason. He stomped on the ground with both legs, and his figure darted out like a nimble monkey, chasing after Gray. Whoosh! As he ran, Gray felt the sound of approaching footsteps behind him. His face was filled with anxiety. The reason he was not injured was naturally because he was wearing the Iron Rhino inner armor. Even the ferocious blood warrior's blood fiend ability could hardly damage the armor's defensive power. Blocking the scrawny man's punch was naturally a piece of cake. However, the Iron Rhino inner armor was only an inner armor after all. It could only protect the torso apart from the limbs and head. Now, the scrawny man had probably guessed that he was wearing an inner armor. His next attack would definitely focus on his head, which was a vital part. Therefore, even with the protection of the Iron Rhino inner armor, it could not protect him. Moreover, the worst thing was that he could only use his blood power a few more times at most. At this moment, boom, there was a rumbling sound behind his head. The skinny man's fist was not big, but it was as hard as a hammer. It was aimed straight at his head. He could even feel the cold wind from the fist blowing against the hair behind his head. Whoosh! He moved to the side and dodged to the side. The long sword in his hand swept in the direction of the fist behind him. Voila! The long sword cut through many withered branches, but it was unable to cut through the skinny man. In front of him, a figure wearing a white cloak suddenly appeared and punched towards his head. It was the skinny man. Punk! Gritting his teeth, he channeled the power of blood into his left hand. His left hand suddenly swelled up and punched toward the incoming fist. Bang! When the two fists collided, the air that was squeezed between the two fists suddenly exploded, producing a sharp whistling sound. Hiss! Gray's left hand went numb again. This time, it was more serious than before. It was as if his entire hand had lost all feeling. Moreover, a strong force flowed into his body through his left hand, and his body flew out uncontrollably. He fell more than 10 meters away and rolled a few times on the ground. Pata! Lying on the snow with his left hand unconscious, Gray could only use the power of blood 2 more times. The situation was getting worse for him. However, the expression on Gray's face relaxed at this moment. He had finally persevered. Pung, pung, pung. Behind the skinny man, a figure wearing a golden battle suit suddenly sped over. His feet stepped on the snow and sank slightly before he flew over like a dragonfly, skimming the surface of the water. This figure was naturally Viscount Fergus. Gray had never thought of escaping from the hands of this ferocious blood warrior with his own strength. He was very clear about his own strength. It was impossible to escape from the hands of a ferocious blood warrior whose strength and speed surpassed his own. From the beginning to the end, his goal was to hold on until Viscount Fergus arrived. With the commotion caused by the battle here, it was inevitable that Viscount Fergus would notice. Now he had finally made it. Whoosh! Viscount Fergus, who had used the power of blood to increase his speed, was extremely fast. In an instant, he was already behind the skinny man. Clang! Seeing that Gray was sent flying by the skinny man with a punch, and the situation was unclear, Viscount Fergus' face was filled with anger. He attacked furiously, unsheathing his green magic sword and slicing towards the skinny man's waist. He was prepared to cut the skinny man in half. Not good. The skinny man noticed the commotion behind him and was shocked. He quickly dodged to the side. Whoosh! He dodged, but the white cloak behind him couldn't. It was directly cut in half by the green longsword. He turned around with lingering fear and looked in the direction of the longsword with vigilance. McCarthy Thompson. When the skinny man turned around, Viscount Fergus saw the skinny man's face. Viscount Fergus' gaze paused, and he immediately called out a name. Then his eyes burst with light. He took a step forward and stabbed the green longsword in his hand towards the skinny man. Whoosh! When Viscount Fergus called out the name, the skinny man's face suddenly changed. While quickly retreating to avoid Viscount Fergus' sword, he put the thumb and index finger of his right hand to his lips, and a sharp whistle came out of his mouth. His left hand was still numb. Gray stood up with the sword in his right hand. Suddenly, he felt his shoulder being held by someone. At the same time, there was a delicate fragrance and a voice. Gray, are you okay? He turned his head and saw that his shoulder was held by Caroline's hands. She was looking at him with a worried face. I'm fine. Gray shook his head and looked at Viscount Fergus and the skinny man who were fighting not far away. He frowned and asked, Sister Caroline, do you know who McCarthy Thompson is? Caroline also looked at the skinny man. She immediately understood why Gray asked this question, and she said, Don't worry. This man used to be an alchemist serving the Sidney family. But more than a year ago, he was found to be conducting human experiments that were forbidden by the kingdom. Therefore, he was wanted by the Sidney family. I thought this man had already escaped from the Marquis of Sidney domain. I didn't expect him to be hiding in our Fergus family domain. At this moment, a few people ran towards them. There was Bernal, Elise, and the father and son of the Harry family. Caroline Gray, what is going on? Why is father fighting with someone? That man is a wanted criminal, Gray and Elise explained briefly to everyone. Roar, roar, roar. Suddenly, a series of roars sounded. Everyone looked towards the direction of the roar. Even in the surrounding forest, dozens of large hunting beasts were crazily rushing towards them. Not good. This man said that the large hunting beasts in the forest were his pets. He should be able to control them. Gray suddenly remembered what the skinny man said before. The whistle he made was probably to summon these beasts. You guys go stop those beasts. I'll go help the Viscount. Lord Harry ordered and pulled out an axe from his back. He then rushed towards the place where Viscount Fergus and the skinny man were fighting. He was one of the 5 elite blood warriors in Viscount Fergus' domain. With Viscount Fergus holding back the beasts, he could already join the battle of the fierce blood warriors. Each of you, block one direction. Bernal's face was serious. He took the lead and rushed towards one direction. There were a lot of beasts. They couldn't let these beasts interfere with Viscount Fergus's battle. Gray considered for a moment, and finally decided on a direction to meet the wild beasts that were pouncing on him. It wasn't that he was afraid of exposing his strength as an elite blood warrior. It was just that he could only use the power of blood twice now. Joining Viscount Fergus's battle wouldn't be of much help. It was better to stop these beasts and prevent them from interfering with Viscount Fergus's battle. Roar! A gray bear that was supposed to be hibernating stood up on its forelimbs. When it stood up, it was more than 3 meters tall. Its huge bare paw was like a millstone, slapping towards Gray. Puff! Dodging the giant bear's paw, Gray leaped and brushed past the giant bear. In that instant, the sword in his hand flashed with a cold light as it swept across the giant bear's neck. Clang! The bear fell, making a sound like the pillars of a house collapsing. Bang! Gray landed and stomped on the ground. His whole body moved several meters horizontally. His sword chopped off the head of a wild wolf that was preparing to charge in while Gray was fighting with the bear. Puff, puff, puff! Even if he didn't have much power of blood left, he was still an elite blood warrior. Moreover, the blood technique he practiced was Wind Wolf. His speed was extremely fast. Not a single beast could break through the area he blocked. He even had the time to help Elise and Caroline on both sides to block and share the pressure. Puff! After the last tiger with white fur was killed, no more beasts rushed in this direction. There were a lot of beasts, probably 30 to 40 in total. Moreover, after being summoned by the skinny man's whistle, their ferocity burst forth, and they madly rushed in this direction. Chapter 106. Dang, dang, dang. Viscount Fergus and the Lord of Harry were fighting with the skinny man. Viscount Fergus was fighting with the skinny man from the front, and the Lord of Harry was attacking from the back or the side from time to time. The skinny man was wearing a pair of black iron gloves on his hands. The sound of metal clashing came from the gloves and the sword of Viscount Fergus. However, the skinny man was clearly at a disadvantage against the attacks of Viscount Fergus and the Lord of Harry. He would get injured from time to time. There were already a few wounds on his body, but they were not serious. The wounds on his body kept increasing, and the large hunting beasts he controlled were all killed before they could even get close. The skinny man's face was filled with anxiety. An invisible wave emitted from his body and spread to the fallen leaves covered in snow. Shwa, shwa, shwa. Suddenly, the fallen leaves around began to grow green branches. They swayed like sharp swords and stabbed towards Viscount Fergus and the Lord of Harry. Viscount Fergus and the Lord of Harry's face changed, and they quickly dodged to the side. From the looks of it, the sharpness of these branches was not weaker than a real arrow. That was the truth. Poof, poof, poof. Poof, 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 poof. Poof, poof. Poof, 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 poof. So, the skinny man took this opportunity to turn and run. If he continued to stay, he would die, especially since the opponent already knew his identity as a marquis wanted criminal. At that moment, Viscount Fergus suddenly roared, and a meter-long green wind blade appeared. Poof, poof, poof. The wind blade easily cut through the branches between Viscount Fergus and the skinny man and chased after the skinny man. Not good. The skinny man was startled by the commotion behind him, and he immediately dodged to the right. Although he didn't see what was behind him, his instinct told him that it was not something good. Poof! But just as he turned sideways, before he could lift his left leg, the green wind blade had already sliced through his left thigh. Bright red blood spurted out crazily, splattering several meters away. He roared in pain, lost his balance on one leg, and fell to the ground with a plop. He knew that he was finished. Without his right leg, it was impossible for him to escape from an opponent of the same cultivation level. He turned back to look at Viscount Fergus with a venomous gaze. He was unwilling to give up. His experiment had not succeeded yet. If his experiment had succeeded, he would have been able to tear these ferocious blood warriors to shreds with a single order. Viscount Fergus saw his unwillingness, but the sword in Viscount Fergus's hand did not show any mercy. Puff! The long sword cut through the skinny man's neck and came out from the back of his neck. His head flew into the air with a look of resentment on it. Oh, Viscount Fergus stood not far away from the skinny man's corpse, where the blood could not splatter. He held his blood-stained sword and sighed softly. Although the skinny man had lost his ability to escape, he was still a ferocious blood warrior after all. Moreover, he could use the blood fiend ability. Just in case, he directly beheaded the skinny man. Viscount Fergus looked at Gray and asked after sheathing his sword, "Gray, how is your left hand?" When he rushed over, he just happened to see Gray and the skinny man exchange a punch, and then Gray was sent flying. It was precisely because of this that he had attacked the skinny man in anger before he had figured out the skinny man's identity. "It's still a little numb, but should be fine," Gray said with uncertainty. "Let me take a look." Viscount Fergus had already walked over with large strides. He lifted Gray's left hand and checked it. After a while, he let out a sigh of relief. "The muscles are a little strained, but the bones are fine. Don't practice for the next few days." Viscount Fergus raised his eyebrows slightly. There was a trace of doubt in his heart. Gray became an upper-level blood warrior less than a day ago, so he didn't have time to tell him. As for Gray's performance when hunting the beast before, he thought Gray used the blood force to increase his movement speed. Therefore, he thought Gray was still a middle-level blood warrior. But with the strength of a middle-level blood warrior, he only suffered a little strain after exchanging a punch with a ferocious blood warrior. This kind of injury was not too serious, but too light. However, when he thought about how the skinny man didn't even take out his gloves, he was relieved. The skinny man probably didn't use his full strength. Gray could feel Viscount Fergus's doubts. But now that Lord Harry and his son were here, it was naturally not convenient to reveal his current strength. "How did you get involved with this marquis wanted criminal?" Viscount Fergus didn't delve into this question and asked again. "When I was going deeper into the Black Earth Forest, I saw this wooden house. When I wanted to explore this wooden house, I met this person." Gray said after carefully recalling. "This person was talking and trying to kill me. Now that I think about it, he might have thought that I discovered his identity as a wanted criminal, or he was afraid that I would spread the news that he was here. That's why he tried to kill me." "Father, this person's blood beast ability should be to control plants. How did he manage to control beasts?" On the side, Bernal asked with doubt. "I'm not too sure. This house should be built by McCarthy Thompson. Let's go in and take a look." Viscount Fergus shook his head. This was also the first time he had seen someone who could control beasts without any ability. Moreover, there were so many of them. Although he knew that there was a special blood technique that could control beasts, there were many restrictions. Whether it was the strength or the number of beasts controlled, there were strict restrictions. It was far from being able to control as many beasts as the wanted criminal McCarthy Thompson. With doubts in their hearts, everyone pushed open the door and walked into the wooden house. The first thing they saw was a long table. On the long table, there were many bottles and jars, as well as some rune items that had other uses. They were very similar to the bottles and jars that they saw at Master Tulu's place. It was obvious that this person was indeed an alchemist. Everyone split up and searched the room. On a tea table near the wall, Gray found dozens of papers that were filled with content. They were held by a wooden clamp. Obviously, these things were rather important to the skinny man. Otherwise, he would not have treasured them so much. Picking up the stack of papers, Gray quickly flipped through them. The first 20-plus pages were filled with formulas that Gray could not understand. Gray skimmed through them. Finally, there were some things that Gray could understand. Looking at the format, it seemed to be a diary of an experiment. October 3rd. I've succeeded. After countless failures and improvements, I've successfully controlled a beast with drugs. October 15th. The number of beasts under control has reached 38. October 20th. For the past few days, I've been capturing beasts in the Red Leaves Forest. The number of beasts under control has exceeded 100. November 3rd. At first, the beasts under control developed resistance to the drug and lost control one after another. Facts have proven that in order to reach a practical level, continuous improvements have to be made. The development of resistance must be prolonged. It would be best if the resistance could be eliminated. November 12th. research has not made any progress. The strength of the drug is still too low. With the current strength and resistance of the blood fiends, it is impossible to succeed on them. The record ended here. It stopped at a few days before Gray and the rest arrived. Gray, what did you write? Viscount Fergus and the rest asked after Gray finished reading. This person created a drug that can control beasts for a certain period of time. After this period of time, the beast will develop resistance to the drug and will no longer be controlled by it. Most of the beasts in the Black Earth Forest were captured from other places and used this method to control them. Gray was amazed. He finally understood why the skinny man could control beasts. And this person's ultimate goal was to control blood fiends. He wanted to improve this drug to achieve his goal of controlling blood fiends, but he did not succeed. After hearing Gray's words, everyone was amazed. This person could actually create a drug that could control beasts. Although it was not perfect, it was already very impressive. However, thinking that this person had once served the Sidney Marquis family, if he did not have the corresponding talent in alchemy, he would not have been chosen by the Sidney family. They were slightly relieved. If not for the fact that the kingdom banned human experimentation, this person's future achievements would not be low. He might even become a master alchemist. There's a leather book here. The group continued to search. Not long after, Bernal found a book that was completely covered in leather under the mattress. He flipped open the book and said, after a few glances, "This is a blood technique called wood monkey. This should be the blood technique that this person cultivated." It is indeed his blood technique. Viscount Fergus nodded. There was an introduction of this person's blood technique on the wanted poster. The blood technique that this person cultivated was indeed wood monkey. Moreover, the blood technique of wood monkey could control the growth of plants to a certain extent. It could be said to be an excellent auxiliary method for alchemists. Chapter 107. Everyone searched the room. Other than the dozens of pieces of paper that Gray found and the blood method that Bernal found, they only found a few crystal bottles filled with an unknown liquid. Because there were no labels on the bottles, they did not know what the liquid was for. Could it be the kind of medicine that could control wild beasts? After taking these things and wrapping the skinny man's head with a blanket, everyone returned to the initial location outside the Black Forest. At this location, the soldiers had already set up tents. "Lord Viscount, do we continue to enter the Black Forest to kill?" Lord Harrison asked. "No. Let the soldiers remove the tents and return directly to the castle." Viscount Fergus shook his head. With such a large forest, it was naturally impossible for the 7 of them to clear out all the wild beasts in the forest in one go. Therefore, they originally planned to spend a few days repeatedly entering the Black Forest from different directions to search for and kill large wild beasts. However, according to the experimental records found in the house, the large hunting beasts in the Black Earth Forest were all controlled by the wanted criminal, McCarthy Thompson. Since the wanted criminal, McCarthy Thompson, did not appear when he was summoned, then there should not be any beasts left. Of course, the most important thing was to bring the head of the wanted criminal McCarthy Thompson to the Sidney Castle as soon as possible. Wanted criminals all had a bounty. If they waited until the head rotted and could not prove their identity, they would miss out on this bounty. The group of a dozen people returned to the castle in the afternoon. The matter of the wanted criminal McCarthy Thompson would naturally be handled by Viscount Fergus. Gray and the rest returned to their respective bedrooms. "Young Master Gray, your hand, what happened?" Gray's left hand was swollen and swollen. The maid Barbara saw it at a glance and was immediately worried. "It's nothing, just a muscle strain. Go get me the emerald blood clotting ointment." Gray indicated that he was fine. The maid, Barbara, hurriedly trotted over and quickly returned with the green jade hemostatic ointment. She smeared it on Gray's hand and gently rubbed it over Gray's left hand, allowing the ointment to take effect faster. Then, she wrapped a white gauze around Gray's hand. Traces of coolness seeped into Gray's arm. Gray felt much better. He couldn't help but recall his battle with the wanted criminal McCarthy Thompson today. The gap between him and the ferocious blood warriors was obvious. Although he was already quite strong among high-rank blood warriors, there was still a large gap between him and the ferocious blood warriors. However, he did not belittle himself. Today, if it had been another high-ranking blood warrior instead of him, he would have died long ago. The Wind Wolf's speed and Hanhu's strength allowed the gap between him and the ferocious blood warriors to be closer than that between ordinary high-level blood warriors. This was also the reason why he was able to last until Viscount Fergus arrived from the hands of the wanted criminal McCarthy Thompson. This person can actually refine a medicine that can control wild beasts. Although it is only temporary, it is not difficult to see that this person has talent in alchemy. Those papers that I discovered earlier, the first part is very likely the derivation process of the beast-controlling medicine. Unfortunately, I don't have any knowledge of alchemy. Otherwise, I might be able to derive the formula of the beast-controlling medicine from these papers. The beast-controlling medicine invented by the wanted criminal McCarthy Thompson definitely had great potential. If it could be further derived to the point of being able to control blood fiends, even the lowest level of the murderous level blood fiends would be invaluable. On this continent, there was no lack of blood fiends. Imagine if tens of thousands of murderous level blood fiends appeared on the battlefield and uniformly charged at the enemy. What kind of shocking scene would that be? It would be difficult for any kingdom's army to resist. Wherever they passed, they would be absolutely invincible. Unfortunately, he wasn't an alchemist and couldn't derive the formula of the beast-controlling medicine. He also didn't have the ability to improve the formula to the point of being able to control blood fiends. Although wild beasts and blood fiends were both called beasts, there was a huge gap between them. An experienced hunter could contend against an ordinary wild beast, but only a murderous level blood fiend could contend against a murderous level blood fiend. The gap between the two was like the gap between an ordinary hunter and a murderous warrior. It seemed small, but was actually as wide as a chasm. Gray even felt that even if he gave this formula to Master Tulu of Sydney Castle, it was very likely that he wouldn't be able to derive it further. The beast-controlling medicine should only be at the level of an ordinary medicine. A medicine that could control blood fiends should at least be at the level of a magic potion. Master Tulu probably didn't have the ability to derive it. Clap, clap, clap. Behind him, the bedroom door was pushed open. Following the crisp sound of footsteps, a person ran in. Gray didn't need to turn around to know that it was Sarah. After all, she was the only one who would run into his bedroom without knocking. Brother, I heard that you were injured." Sure enough, Sarah's anxious voice could be heard from behind him. She quickly ran to Gray's side. Seeing the bandaged left hand of Gray, her face was full of worry. Tears welled up in her eyes, ready to fall at any time. "It's just a minor injury. It's fine," Gray comforted her. While speaking, he endured the pain and moved his left hand, indicating that the injury wasn't serious. Really? Gray nodded heavily. A few days later, Gray's left hand had fully recovered. The bounty for the wanted criminal McCarthy Thompson had also been collected by the Fergus family. The reward was a total of 5,000 gold coins, almost equivalent to half a year's income for Viscount Fergus. But considering the other party's identity, it was only natural. The other party was a pharmacist who could create wealth. If the bounty was too low, it would inevitably cause some families to take risks and cover for the other party, collaborating with him to refine medicine and sell it secretly. Thus, a high bounty was inevitable. In fact, Gray felt that with the other party's talent in alchemy, a bounty of 5,000 gold coins was too little. However, if he was given another chance, he definitely wouldn't stop Viscount Fergus from killing this person. This person's talent was high, but he had no moral bottom line. He actually used human bodies for experiments. This was simply insane and exceeded the limits of Gray's tolerance. Boom, boom, boom. In an empty space in a warehouse in the castle, Gray's left hand continuously smashed into the air, causing the air to explode like firecrackers. It's indeed healed. Feeling the strength of his left hand, Gray nodded in satisfaction. His left hand was indeed healed. After all, it wasn't fractured. Furthermore, he had the emerald blood clotting ointment, an extremely effective ointment that commoners couldn't afford. It was natural for him to recover in a few days. "I've been delayed for a few days. From today onwards, I can continue to practice the blood technique. I haven't had time to practice after reaching the level of an upper-level blood warrior. According to the past, my training speed should be slower than when I was a middle-level blood warrior. But I don't know how much it will decrease, and how long it will take for me to reach the level of a ferocious blood warrior. Chapter 108. In the blink of an eye, 2 months had passed. Winter passed, and spring came. The thick accumulated snow melted into water, melted into the soil, and flowed into the low-lying rivers. Around the castle, in the horse farm at the foot of the mountain, green grass sprouted one after another. The tall deciduous trees also began to sprout green shoots. Due to the cold weather, the commoners who had been cooped up in their houses for over 2 months began to walk out one after another. The sun was not blazing hot, and the breeze that blew on their bodies still carried a slight chill. However, their faces were filled with radiant smiles. They had finally made it through this damned winter. Finally, they did not have to frown miserably every day as their rations dwindled. They could finally plant rations again, south of the castle, in the open field where Gray usually trained. Facing the still, slightly chilly wind, Gray stood in the open field and trained in the blood technique. After more than 2 hours, he stopped training, sweating profusely. He let out a long breath, which turned into a wisp of white smoke and slowly dissipated. 2 months had passed, and the time he could persevere in training in the blood technique had increased once again. He was now able to complete the first training posture for the 5th time. Completing the first training posture for the 5th time in 2 months means that it will take me at least another 6 months to reach the level of a ferocious blood warrior. This is all thanks to the Sydney family increasing their sales of blood fiends to the Fergus family. Now, I can consume blood fiends' blood once a week. Gray thought to himself. After reaching the level of an upper-level blood warrior, the speed at which his strength decreased once again. After all, as one's strength increased, it became harder to increase it. I only need 8 months to raise my strength from an upper-level blood warrior to a ferocious blood warrior. This speed is already not considered slow. Although the speed had slowed down, Gray wasn't too dissatisfied with it. He had asked Viscount Fergus some time ago. He had become an upper-level blood warrior at the age of 27 and a ferocious blood warrior at the age of 35. In other words, he had used a full 8 years to advance from an upper-level blood warrior to a ferocious blood warrior. Compared to the Viscount, his current speed of improvement was more than 10 times faster. What was there to be dissatisfied with? After taking a hot bath and changing into a new set of clothes, Gray felt much less fatigued from his cultivation. It's time to tell Viscount Fergus about my advancement to an upper-level blood warrior. Gray walked towards Viscount Fergus's study. 6 months was equivalent to half a year. Although the bottleneck would be stagnant for a period of time, and this period would be slightly longer, it shouldn't be too long. If he didn't tell Viscount Fergus that he was already an upper-level bloodthirsty warrior as soon as possible and let Viscount Fergus be mentally prepared, then his training might stop after 6 months. Even if he had the ability to transform his body by consuming the blood of blood fiends, he would not be able to do anything without the blood of a higher grade. As for obtaining it with his own ability, it was currently impossible. With his current strength, it was already difficult for him to kill a murderous level blood fiend, let alone a mad level blood fiend that was stronger than a murderous level blood fiend. As for buying it with money, where would the money come from? Of course, the most important point was that even if he had the money, he might not be able to buy it. For example, the amount of wind wolf blood that the Fergus family consumed every month was limited by the Sydney family. Without the corresponding channels, it was very difficult to buy it. The reason why the Sydney family was able to supply it was because they had a hunting team that specialized in hunting blood fiends. They would enter the forest from time to hunt blood fiends. Bang, bang, bang. Gray walked to Viscount Fergus's study and knocked on the door. "Come in." Viscount Fergus's steady voice sounded from inside. Gray pushed the door open and walked in. "Gray, why are you here?" Viscount Fergus smiled when he saw that it was Gray who had entered. "Father, my strength has reached upper-level blood warrior." Since he had already decided, Gray didn't hesitate and spoke directly. "What? Upper-level blood warrior? Are you sure? Hearing Gray's words, Viscount Fergus's expression froze for a moment. After a while, he frowned slightly and spoke with a doubtful tone. With his understanding of Gray's character, he naturally knew that Gray wouldn't joke about this kind of matter. However, the shock of this news was too great, and he couldn't believe it. How long had it been since Gray became a middle-level blood warrior? It had only been a little more than half a year. Now, Gray actually ran over to him and told him that he was already an upper-level blood warrior. Didn't that mean that Gray had only used a little more than half a year to advance from a middle-level blood warrior to an upper-level blood warrior? Was this possible? There shouldn't be a mistake. Gray nodded and said, I can already persist to the 5th cycle of my blood technique practice. The 5th cycle? You come with me. Suppressing the shock in his heart, Viscount Fergus stood up and led Gray quickly to a house at the back of the castle. He pushed the door open and walked in. What he saw was an empty room. There was only a weapon rack in the corner of the room. There were several ironwood weapons on the rack. The floor of the house was paved with large pieces of green stone slabs. The stone used for the slabs was the same as the stone used for the battle platform in Sydney Castle. It was a stone material that was harder than steel. Gray knew this place because this was where Viscount Fergus usually practiced. Although blood techniques were useless if one didn't know the medicinal formula that matched the blood essence and implanted the corresponding bloodline, it was still a rare blood technique. However, a blood technique that could reach the berserk level was already very rare. It was best if it was not exposed. Therefore, Viscount Fergus usually cultivated in this sealed training room. Use the power of blood and display your fastest movement speed. Viscount Fergus looked at Gray and said with some expectation. Although he was shocked when Gray said that he was already an upper blood warrior, he was very much looking forward to it. If Gray could really become an upper blood warrior from a middle blood warrior in just half a year, Gray's future potential would be unimaginable. Yes. Gray nodded and poured the power of blood into his legs. His legs under his trousers suddenly swelled up and slightly propped up his trousers. Then he suddenly flashed out. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. His figure flashed rapidly in this cultivation room, appearing at the left side of the wall, the right side of the wall, the door, and the innermost side of the wall. Viscount Fergus's eyes followed Gray's movements. The look in his eyes became brighter and brighter, and even carried a blazing heat. An upper blood warrior, definitely an upper blood warrior. Only an upper blood warrior could have such speed. All right, that's enough. Viscount Fergus took a deep breath and forcibly suppressed the shock in his heart. He looked at Gray, who had returned to his side, and said, Your strength is indeed that of an upper blood warrior. Your talent has exceeded my expectations. I didn't expect that after you quickly rose from a lower blood warrior to a middle blood warrior, you also rose from a middle blood warrior to an upper blood warrior in a very short time. Thinking of the time Gray took to rise from a lower blood warrior to a middle blood warrior, Viscount Fergus finally reluctantly accepted that Gray had risen to an upper blood warrior so quickly. His expression was solemn as he said in a serious tone, However, I hope that you won't spread this news, not even to Bernal and the others. You should understand my intentions. Yes, father. Gray nodded. Of course, he understood Viscount Fergus's intentions. Chapter 109. After parting ways with Viscount Fergus, Gray returned to his bedroom. He waved the maid, Barbara, away, closed the door, and took out the 2 small bronze bottles from the compartment of the coffee table. Shaking the small bronze bottle with the concentrated potion written on it and confirming that the concentrated potion was still there, Gray put the potion back into the compartment and looked at the other small bronze bottle. The small bottle naturally contained the shadow, Snake's blood. It had been half a year since he last consumed Hanhu's blood, and in the process, his strength had increased from a middle-rank blood warrior to an upper-rank blood warrior. He estimated that his current physical fitness should be able to withstand the transformation. Unscrewing the stopper of the small bronze bottle, a strong smell of blood entered Gray's nose. He held his breath, held the small bronze bottle, and poured it into his mouth. Gulp, gulp. There was not much in the small bronze bottle, and he had already swallowed the shadow snake's blood into his stomach in a few gulps. Whoosh! As if he had just swallowed boiling water, a scalding heat appeared in Gray's stomach and wantonly churned. Then it began to spread to other parts of his body. The heat spread very quickly, and in a short while every organ, every muscle tissue, and even the most microscopic cells of his body were filled with this heat. It was as if he was in a sauna, or as if he was being roasted on a fire. Large beads of sweat slid down his forehead. He did not look at the mirror, but he could guess that he was probably drunk now, his face flushed red. As sweat dripped from his forehead and from his temples, the clothes on his body gradually became wet. He lost his sense of time for a while, and he could not tell how long it had been. The heat on his body gradually subsided and finally disappeared without a trace. Phew! Gray panted heavily, as if he had just finished running several marathons. He felt extremely tired all over. After a while, after he had recovered a little, he stood up from the chair. After the transformation, although I still feel very tired, it is obviously not as strong as the last time I consumed Hanu's blood. Sure enough, my previous conjecture was right. If I don't want to cause damage to my body due to the metamorphosis, I either need to wait for a longer period of time or have an extremely strong physique. Although I'm not sure which of the two conditions is affecting it, as long as my strength increases by 1 level, it shouldn't cause any harm to my body. With heavy steps, he left the bedroom and went to the bathroom. After taking another shower, Gray returned to the bedroom and fell asleep on the bed. In order to recover from extreme fatigue, the fastest way would be to consume a healing potion or something similar. One had to know that in the last Viscount battle, the Richens family had been severely injured on the first day, but they had fully recovered on the second day. This showed how powerful this healing potion was. Gray naturally didn't have any healing potions, so he could only use deep sleep to speed up his recovery. At noon, Gray was woken up by the maid Barbara for lunch. In the afternoon, he went to the south of the castle where he usually trained. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The power of blood flowed into his legs, and his figure moved back and forth in the open space. After a while, he stopped. As expected, my speed didn't increase. From the last battle between Viscount Fergus and the Shadow Snake, it wasn't hard to guess that the Shadow Snake's speed was inferior to the Windwolf's. The result was as expected. His speed didn't increase. Of course, he didn't slow down because of this. Fortunately, this was the case. Otherwise, he would be crying. This once again proved that this metamorphosis didn't absorb all the characteristics of the corresponding blood fiends. At least, the characteristics that were inferior to the original body weren't absorbed. What about strength? The power of blood flowed into his hands, and Gray's hands visibly swelled. His originally strong arms became slightly sturdy. Whoosh! Then he suddenly squatted down and clenched his fists. Like a pile driver, he smashed them into the stone floor. Boom! With a loud sound, the stone floor that Gray's fist had smashed into pieces. Under the powerful impact of the fist hitting the ground, all the fragments shot out in all directions like bullets. Not only that, but the stone tiles adjacent to this one, and even the nearby ones, were all smashed into pieces. The surrounding ground was filled with fragments of stone tiles, and the soil that had sputtered out after the stone tiles were shattered. It was as if a pile driver had really hit the ground. I shouldn't use this method in the future. Seeing this scene of destruction, Gray had an embarrassed look on his face as he muttered to himself. As his strength increased, his destructive power also increased. With a punch, it wasn't as simple as changing a stone tile. If he wanted to change it, he would have to change a large piece of stone. With his current position in the castle, the butler and servants definitely wouldn't dare to say anything. They would only obediently fill in the holes that appeared on the ground and find new stone tiles to replace them. However, he himself was rather embarrassed. After all, this was increasing the workload of others, and by a large margin. Standing up and shaking off the debris and soil on his body, he frowned slightly. Whether my strength has increased or not, I can't feel it. In terms of speed, he could intuitively feel it through the speed of movement, but in terms of strength, it was very difficult to intuitively feel it through this method. It would be great if there was a punching machine like the one in his previous life that could test one's fist strength. Unfortunately, There wasn't one in this world. No, perhaps there was one, but Gray didn't know about it. This world had some strange powers that didn't exist in his previous life. In some aspects, the degree of development was not inferior to his previous life, and even surpassed it. For example, Viscount Fergus's magic sword could cut through steel as easily as wood. This kind of craftsmanship was definitely not possible in his previous life. Although I've seen the two types of blood fiends, Hanhu and Shadow Snake, and I've also seen their battle with Viscount Fergus, I really can't tell which type of blood fiend is stronger. Shaking his head, Gray didn't want to delve into this question. He looked at his fist, and a trace of joy appeared on his face. I don't know if I've absorbed the Shadow Snake's strength, but I've definitely absorbed the Shadow Snake's defense. Based on his previous observation of the Shadow Snake, he discovered that it had a stronger defense. The magic sword in Viscount Fergus's hands had the ability to increase its sharpness. Even so, it took many slashes on the Shadow Snake's body before it was completely killed. From this, it wasn't hard to see that the Shadow Snake had a stronger defense. Although this kind of defense couldn't be compared to blood fiends like the iron-plated rhinoceros, it definitely surpassed the Wind Wolf and Hanhu. In the past, his fist wouldn't break the skin, but it would hurt and swell. This time, however, he didn't feel any pain at all. Without a doubt, his defense had greatly increased. Putting my strength aside, my defense has definitely increased. This means that the current me has the speed of the Wind Wolf, the strength of the Hanhu, and the defense of the Shadow Snake. Gathering the powerful characteristics of three types of blood fiends into one body, the current me should be able to defeat the disciples of the top aristocratic families who practice special blood techniques, right? The special blood techniques mastered by the top aristocratic families would generally surpass ordinary blood techniques in terms of strength, speed, and defense. This was also the reason why the people of the top aristocratic families were stronger than those of ordinary families at the same level. Chapter 110. Does the Shadow Snake's blood only strengthen my defense? Gray pondered this question as he left the empty space. In the distance, Barbara, who was dressed in a black and white maid outfit, walked over. Her figure was slender and graceful. Looking at her figure walking over, Gray's eyes suddenly widened, but quickly returned to normal. Young Master Gray. Barbara didn't notice Gray's slight moment and walked in front of him to greet him respectfully. Gray nodded and ordered, "Go tell Butler Nick to find someone to repave the stone slabs in that empty space." "Yes, young Master Gale," Barbara answered and left. The stone slabs in this empty space had to be repaired every few months, and she was already used to it. Glenn's gaze looked at her departing figure, and a peculiar expression appeared in his eyes. Sure enough, she can see. At this moment, in Gray's eyes, Barbara's figure was no longer dressed in a black and white maid outfit, but a blurry human figure painted with red paint, like an oil painting. The human figure was extremely blurry, and he could only vaguely make out the shape of a person. The red on the surface was uneven, and there were shades of red. It was like the random graffiti of an abstract artist. Could this be infrared perception? Gray guessed as he supported his chin with one hand. Snakes were animals with poor eyesight. To say that they were short-sighted was an understatement, but they had an excellent ability to detect prey. Even if they were tens of meters away, even at night, they could still accurately detect their prey. The reason was that they could sense the infrared emitted by living creatures. This infrared was a type of heat radiation. As long as it was a living creature, it would inevitably emit intense heat radiation, and it would inevitably be unable to escape the snake's infrared perception. And now, he seemed to have obtained this infrared perception ability. How can this be? My strength hasn't reached the level of a vicious blood warrior, so how can I have the ability of a blood beast? No, I understand. Thoughts spun rapidly in Gray's mind, and Gray thought of a somewhat reasonable explanation. Infrared sensing was considered a snake's ability, but it wasn't exclusive to snake-type blood fiends. Even ordinary snakes possessed this ability. That was why he possessed infrared sensing ability before he became a ferocious blood warrior. I didn't expect that in addition to its defensive properties, it would also gain infrared perception. Even if I'm not sure about its strength, this shadow snake blood beast's blood is worth it. A single serving of shadow snake blood could enhance two aspects. Just from this point alone, the shadow snake blood was more valuable than the Hanhu blood and the wind wolf blood. Moreover, both the defensive properties and the infrared sensing properties were extremely useful. The defensive attribute could strengthen Gray's defense. At a critical moment, it could save Gray's life. However, if Gray had obtained the defensive properties of a Shadow Serpent during his battle with the wanted criminal McCarthy Thompson, he would have been able to defend himself much more effectively. His left hand would not have been injured in the end. Infrared vision, on the other hand, was extremely useful. The encounter with the Shadow Serpent during his journey to the Imperial remains in the Red Leaf Forest still gave him an inexplicable chill in his heart. The Shadow Serpent was completely hidden in the shadows. Even Viscount Fergus was unable to detect it. The Shadow Serpent's sudden attack had given him a fright. Fortunately, Viscount Fergus had reacted in time. Otherwise, he and Bernal would have been seriously injured, if not dead. If he had possessed infrared perception at that time, he would have been able to detect the Shadow Serpent, even if the Shadow Serpent was hiding in the shadows. In that case, he would have been able to take precautions in advance. As if he had discovered a new toy, Gray had been using infrared vision in the castle. Each and every servant was like a random graffiti in his eyes. There was a kind of abstract beauty to them. Their bodies seemed to be painted with different shades of red paint. Their torsos were generally darker, while their limbs were much lighter. There was even a faint reddish-green color. If the one who obtained this infrared perception was an abstract painter, at this moment, he would have been inspired and his brush would have been flying. It wasn't until a figure that was shorter and more slender than the others ran towards him that he turned off his infrared perception. No, it wasn't that he turned it off. He just adjusted the sensitivity of this infrared perception to the lowest level so that this infrared perception wouldn't affect normal vision. However, if it was in a dark environment, he would still be able to sense people in the dark. The person who ran towards him was a cute girl about 5 meters tall. She wore a white dress and had 2 braids on her head, one on the left and one on the right, which made her look even cuter. Brother. The girl was naturally Sarah. Just a month ago, which was the last month of winter, she had turned 14 years old. What's wrong? Seeing the other party coming over, Gray couldn't help but smile. Brother, you promised me that after the snow melted, you would accompany me to Fergus City to play. Sarah looked at Gray expectantly. Gray remembered that a month ago, on Sarah's birthday, she forcefully dragged Gray to bring her to Fergus City to play. However, at that time, there was snow everywhere and the weather was extremely cold. Considering that Sarah hadn't started practicing blood techniques and her body wasn't as strong as the rest of them, it was easy for her to catch a cold. Therefore, he said that he would wait until spring next year to make up for her. He had forgotten about it, but Sarah hadn't. As soon as spring arrived and the snow melted, she immediately went to find Gray. Okay, since he had agreed, there was no reason to reject. Moreover, looking at her expectant eyes, Gray couldn't bear to reject. Butler Nick, prepare a carriage for us and a team of soldiers. We need to go to the city. He found a castle, Butler Nick, and ordered. After hearing his orders, Butler Nick asked, Young Master Gray, do we need to call Lord Lind? According to the castle's rules, every time Gray needed to leave the castle, he would need Lord Lind to accompany and protect him. No need to trouble Lord Lind. I only need to take a stroll in Fergus City. A team of soldiers is enough. Gray thought for a while and shook his head. After all, Lord Lind was a lord with noble status. It wouldn't be good to always trouble him. Moreover, he already had the strength of an upper-level blood warrior and didn't need to fear the assassination of the Viscount families. Therefore, he didn't want to trouble him. Yes, young Master Gale. Butler Nick respectfully replied and left. He ordered the other servants to prepare the carriage and soldiers while he trotted all the way to Viscount Fergus' study room on the 2nd floor of the castle. Although this was young Master Gray's own request, if something really happened, he would definitely be punished. Therefore, he immediately came to report the situation to Viscount Fergus. It's fine. Just let him be. send an extra team of soldiers to follow him. Viscount Fergus already knew the strength of Grey as an upper-level blood warrior. Naturally, he also understood that with Grey's current strength, it would be impossible for the Viscount families to assassinate him. Moreover, there were many soldiers stationed in Fergus City, and it was very close to Fergus Castle. If there really was an attack, he could arrive in a few minutes at most. Naturally, he wouldn't stop it. They left the castle in the afternoon and strolled around the city for the whole afternoon. Only in the evening did the two return to the castle. Grey also had a great time strolling around the city for the whole afternoon. After coming to this world for so long, this was the first time he really strolled around the Fergus Castle, which was only a few hundred meters away from Fergus Castle. Although he had strolled around for a while on the way back from learning the nobles' dance, it was only on the way and not a real stroll. At the same time, the heavy stone that had been pressing on his heart since he transmigrated had finally been lifted. In this world, he finally had the ability to protect himself. Chapter 111. Deep in the Black Earth Forest, outside the small house where the wanted criminal McCarthy Thompson had once lived, a purple-haired man dressed in black stepped on the soft black soil as he walked towards the small house. He had a scar across half of his face, and his face was as cold as ice. What was colder was his eyes, which were like icy rays. It was as if anything that was stared at by this pair of eyes would be frozen. He pushed open the door of the small house, walked in, and rummaged through the house. The wardrobe, the bottom of the furniture, under the bed. He searched every nook and cranny of the room carefully. Finally, he stood up and frowned after searching every nook and cranny of the room. Asterisk rustle. Asterisk outside the house. There was a slight rustling sound like the wind. He suddenly turned around and stared coldly. Then, he saw 4 figures who were also dressed in black appear in his field of vision. Captain. The 4 figures dressed in black came to the small house and greeted respectfully. There were both men and women in their voices. How is it? Have you found out who killed McCarthy Thompson? The purple-haired man with the scar on his face asked coldly. We found out. It's the Viscount Emerson Fergus of this place. One of the 4 black-clothed men replied. Emerson Fergus? Muttering this name, the purple-haired man with the scar on his face had a cold gaze. In the afternoon, in the empty space south of the castle, Grey was cultivating when he saw the maid Barbara run over in a panic. What's the matter? Grey frowned slightly, stopped cultivating, and looked at her. He did not like to be disturbed when he was cultivating. Barbara knew this. Since she still came to disturb him despite knowing this, it meant that this matter was more important than his current cultivation. Grey, young master, the Viscount wants you to go to the castle gate and welcome the honorable guest with them. Because she had run all the way here, Barbara was panting heavily. As she panted, her chest rose and fell. Honorable guest. Grey didn't notice it, or rather, he noticed it but didn't have the energy to appreciate it. He muttered the word distinguished guest. To be called a distinguished guest by Viscount Fergus, this person's identity could be imagined. At the very least, this person should be from the Count's family, and this person's status in the Count's family couldn't be too low. The Earl family that is close to the Fergus family is the Ford family. Could it be someone from the Ford family? But the Ford family doesn't seem to have much contact with the Fergus family, right? Why did the Ford family come to visit? With these thoughts in mind, Grey didn't stop walking. He quickly walked toward the castle's entrance with his maid, Barbara. When he walked to the entrance of the castle, he saw Viscount Fergus, Madame de Milan, Bowler, Caroline, and the others waiting there. He walked over to Viscount Fergus's side. Just as he was about to ask, he saw a troop coming from afar. At the outermost edge of the troop were dozens of elite soldiers wearing black and white armor. The horses they were riding were all pure black in color. In the inner layer of the elite soldiers were 8 people wearing white battle armor and riding white horses. In the middle of the group of people wearing white battle armor and soldiers wearing black and white armor was an exquisitely decorated carriage. Pulling the carriage were 2 strong and tall horses. Their hair was crimson red, and their eyes were bright. They were 2 crimson blood horses. To be able to pull the carriage with crimson blood horses, one could tell that the person in the carriage wasn't an ordinary person. In fact, this was the case. On the left and right sides of the carriage, there was the same picture of a blood beast. Its body was bronze in color. It had a thick body for thick legs, a slightly long neck, and 3 sharp horns on its head. There was one on each side of its head, and one on its forehead that pierced the sky. This was the picture of a copperback dragon. The identity of the carriage's owner was obvious. It's actually someone from the Sydney family? Gray's eyes were filled with shock. Because of the words distinguished guest, he thought of someone from the Earl's family. However, he didn't expect this person to be even more important than the Earl's family. He was actually the direct superior of the Fergus family, a family that ruled over 400,000 square kilometers of land. Under the gaze of Gray and the others, the carriage drove to the gate of the castle. 2 people walked down from the carriage. One of them had an old face and mottled hair. He wore a gray robe, but his eyes were extremely sharp. The other person wore a white dress. Her face was well-proportioned and delicate, and she was tall and slender. Her blonde hair was tied into a ponytail, and she naturally exuded a noble aura. Miss Polly Master Tulu, under the lead of Viscount Fergus, Gray, and the others respectfully greeted the 2 people. These 2 people were the daughter of Marquis Sidney, Polly, and the Sidney family's alchemy master, Master Tulu. Looking at the 2 people, Gray's eyes were filled with shock. One was the daughter of a marquis, and the other was an alchemy master who didn't even give face to a marquis. These 2 people were known for their distinguished status, even in the Sidney Marquis family. Gray didn't expect them to come to the Fergus family. This was truly beyond his expectations. Yes, Master Tulu only nodded slightly in response to the greetings. Polly, on the other hand, gracefully returned the greeting. Viscount Fergus and everyone else, sorry for the intrusion. Miss Polly is too polite. It is the honor of the Fergus family that you and Master Tulu are able to visit Fergus Castle. This way, please. Viscount Fergus personally led the 2 people to the Fergus family's guest hall, which was specially used to entertain distinguished guests. The servants brought in pastries and milk tea, and the Fergus family members sat around the 2 people like stars surrounding the moon. I didn't know Miss Polly and Master Tulu would come, so I can only entertain the 2 of you like this. Please forgive me. Madame de Milan apologized. Madam, you are too polite. Polly smiled, elegantly picked up the milk tea, and took a sip. It tastes good. It's good that you like it. Madame de Milan let out a sigh of relief. The 2 people's arrival was too sudden. They didn't have enough time to prepare a lot of things before they arrived at the castle. Master Tulu clearly wasn't interested in the pastries and milk tea prepared by the Fergus family. He didn't touch them at all. Instead, he looked at Viscount Fergus and said, "We came here for 2 reasons. First, the alchemy manuscript and the few bottles of potion you mentioned in your last letter. Second, we're going to McCarthy Thompson's wooden house. The manuscript and the potion are in the castle, but the wooden house is a bit far from the castle. We can only bring Master Tulu there tomorrow." Viscount Fergus said hurriedly as he finally understood the reason for their arrival. "Then give me the manuscript and the few bottles of potion first." Master Tulu faintly nodded. "Okay, I'll have someone go get them." Viscount Fergus was naturally able to guess the value of the beast controlling potions manuscripts and potions. However, the manuscripts and potions in his hands were no more than a pile of waste paper and a few bottles of waste liquid. He naturally didn't mind doing the other party a favor at little cost. "Bernal, go get the stack of manuscripts on my desk and the few bottles of potions in my locker." Bernal answered and soon returned with the manuscript and the few bottles of potion. Master Tulu took the manuscript and began to read it as if there was no one else around. He didn't even care about Viscount Fergus and the others. As he read, his eyes became brighter and brighter. There was a faint smile on his face. He seemed to have discovered something. This also confirmed Gray's guess. The manuscript was related to alchemy. Only alchemists could understand it. Master Tulu was busy reading the manuscript, but the atmosphere in the living room didn't become cold. It was all because of Polly. She didn't put on any airs as she chatted with everyone, laughing and chatting with them. "I didn't expect Sister Caroline to like reading. Right? What kind of books do you like to read, Sister Caroline?" She looked at Caroline. "It's a bit miscellaneous." I can read all kinds of books, but I like books about local customs and customs the most. Caroline said, local customs and customs? That's interesting. Even at home, I can learn about the places far away from here and the customs of the people. Polly smiled. I like the biographies of historical figures the most. Reading their legends is like traveling with them, adventuring with them, seeing all kinds of things together. It's a really interesting feeling. There are biographies in the castle's library, but I don't know if you've read them before. It was rare to meet someone who liked to read, so Caroline was interested. Were their names? Lucas' Travels, Wayne's biography, Roger's biography. I've read some of them, but I haven't read some of them. Polly's face lit up. The books in this world were clearly regional. Many books were only circulated in a small area. This made it so that even the most powerful noble families couldn't guarantee that they had collected all the books. This young lady from the Marquis family is surprisingly easy to get along with. In the living room, Gray would occasionally add a few words, but most of the time, he was just a listener. From the way this young lady from the Marquis family spoke, he could feel that she wasn't as overbearing as the other noble children. Chapter 112. The next morning, after breakfast, a group set off from Fergus Castle and headed towards the Black Earth Forest. Gray, Bernal, and Elise rode at the front of the group, leading the way. Under the protection of the armored soldiers and guards, there was a carriage from the Sidney family. Polly, Tulu, Caroline, and Sarah were in the carriage. Viscount Fergus wasn't in the group. He had strongly suggested that Polly and Tulu be the one to lead the way, but Polly refused because she didn't want to trouble the Viscount too much. In the end, Gray and his siblings were sent to lead the way. Of course, Sarah wasn't included in the group. She had never been to the Black Earth Forest before, and she had only come because she heard that there was something fun to do. Sister Polly, you're the best. Gray and the others didn't agree at first. After all, she hadn't cultivated blood magic and didn't have the ability to protect herself. In the end, it was the Marquis daughter, Polly, who went against everyone's wishes and brought her along. You have to listen to my orders and don't wander around. Otherwise, I'll have to keep you in the carriage. Perhaps it was because she was the youngest in the family and didn't have the privilege of being an elder sister, but after Sarah called her Sister Polly, she immediately gave in and brought along this burden. Yes, I know, Sister Polly. Sarah nodded repeatedly, but her gaze was already looking outside the carriage, her eyes sparkling with excitement. At the front of the group, Gray was riding on a crimson blood horse. He was leading the way while sizing up the 8 Sidney family guards in white armor. Although their horses couldn't be compared to the crimson blood horse, they were definitely a rare breed. They moved in a uniform manner around the carriage, protecting it in the middle. Their movements were extremely coordinated, and even the steps of the horses were in sync. It was obvious that they had undergone professional training. The reason Gray paid attention to them was not because of their uniform movement, but because of their strength. The attire of these 8 people was clearly a grade higher than that of ordinary soldiers. Moreover, they exuded a fierce aura that ordinary soldiers did not possess. If Gray's guess was correct, these 8 people should have practiced blood magic before. Moreover, their strength should not be too weak. Their leader was a middle-aged man with a white face and no beard. He was always expressionless, but his eyes would flash with a sharp glint from time to time when he looked around vigilantly. Being stared at by the other party, Gray actually felt a chill run through his body, as well as an extremely dangerous feeling. This person's strength was at least that of a ferocious warrior, or perhaps even higher. An hour later, the team arrived at the Black Earth Forest. The carriages could no longer move forward. Master Tulu, Polly, and the others got off the carriages and began to walk towards the Black Forest under the protection of the guards and soldiers. Knowing that they had to walk, Polly, Caroline, and Sarah all wore long shirts, trousers, and flat boots, which would not affect their movements. Wow, Sister Caroline, what flower is this? It's so beautiful. Sister Polly, look at the leaves of this tree. They are round. Don't they look like coins? At first, Sarah was in high spirits. She looked left and right. Everything was extremely fresh in her eyes. However, as time passed, her face began to turn bitter. The forest terrain was much harder to walk on the flat ground, and it would take more than half an hour to walk. She was like a pickled eggplant. Gray had no choice but to carry her on his back. The little girl was 5 meters tall and weighed only 80 kilograms. With Gray's current physique, it was not difficult for him to carry her. An hour later, a wooden house appeared in the vision of Gray and the others. It was the former residence of the wanted criminal McCarthy Thompson. The team had ordinary soldiers, so their speed was not fast. It took them more than an hour to reach their destination. This is the house. Master Tulu took a look around the room and walked in without hesitation. Then, his gaze stopped on the bottles and jars on the long table in the wooden house. He picked them up one by one and looked at them carefully, especially those that had remnants in them. He did not know what the other party was looking for. Master Tulu, what are you looking for? We have searched this house before. Apart from the manuscripts and a few bottles of potions, we didn't find anything else related to alchemy. Caroline was curious. The manuscripts don't have a specific refining process. Teacher wants to use the residues on these containers to deduce the order of adding the ingredients. This will save a lot of time. Polly explained. Everyone nodded. They did not expect Master Tulu to have such a method. No wonder he asked them to bring him here. In order not to disturb Master Tulu, everyone dispersed and looked around the room. Gray's gaze swept over the furniture in the room, and he couldn't help but frown slightly. Gray, did you find something? Polly noticed Gray's slight movement, or rather, she had been observing Gray. She was curious about this Viscount's talent, which was only slightly inferior to her elder brother's. Someone came here after we left. Gray said, Someone came here? Polly was suspicious. She did not know why Gray came to this conclusion. Someone has indeed been in the room before, because the furniture in the room has been moved. Bernal also noticed this. He paused for a moment and said his guess. There are a few villages nearby. I think it's possible that a hunter came here. It was a reasonable guess, so the group didn't pursue the matter any further. They continued to wait for Master Tulu's response. There wasn't anything valuable in the room. Once Master Tulu was done with his research, they could return to their rooms. Interesting handling. Genius thinking. Master Tulu seemed to have discovered something after a while and muttered to himself. McCarthy Thompson. It's a pity. With his talent in alchemy, it's not impossible for him to become a master alchemist in the future. It's a pity that he touched the taboo. After muttering to himself for a while, he looked away from the bottles and looked at Polly. Girl, I already have some ideas on how to make the beast-controlling elixir, and I'm going to restore it as soon as possible. I guess I'll stay here for a few days. Do you want to return to Sydney Castle first? Or wait for me for a few days and come back with me? I'll stay here for a few days as well. I'll go back with teacher and take a look at the biographies. Polly smiled, then looked at Bernal, Gray, and the others. My apologies. Teacher and I will have to stay at Fergus Castle for a while. It's our honor, Bernal said with a smile. Both Tulu and Polly had extremely high statuses in the Sydney family. It would be extremely beneficial for the Fergus family to be on good terms with these two. Chapter 113. For the next few days, Polly and Master Tulu stayed with the Fergus family. Master Tulu asked for a small house from the Fergus family and set it up as an alchemy lab. He then spent the whole day trying to recreate the formula for the beast-controlling potion. He even brought back McCarthy Thompson's alchemy tools. Polly, on the other hand, mingled with the younger generation of the Fergus family. They cultivated together, read books together, and went to various places in Viscount Fergus territory to play together. Among Gray and the others, Sarah was the happiest to see Polly and Master Tulu stay in Fergus Castle temporarily. She had received many gifts from Polly in the past few days. She called Polly Sis Polly from the bottom of her heart. One day, Polly, who had just finished her cultivation in the white stone gymnasium of Fergus Castle, sat with Bernal and the others in the pavilion and drank fruit juice. She was rather puzzled as she asked, "Why haven't I seen Gray in the past few days when I was cultivating?" She originally wanted to observe Gray's cultivation and determine Gray's realm among the middle-level blood warriors. However, after not seeing Gray for a few days, she couldn't help but ask. Gray usually cultivates alone in the empty space south of the castle. He rarely cultivates with us. Caroline explained. I see. Polly consciously stopped the topic and didn't ask any further when she thought of the irreconcilable relationship between her elder brother and second brother. She had also heard about Gray's identity from Sarah in the past few days. One side was the son of the Viscount's wife, while the other side was the son of his lover. It was normal for the two sides to have a bad relationship. Phew! Gray let out a long breath and ended his morning cultivation. Beads of sweat covered his forehead and slowly slid down his forehead. Young Master Gray, please use a towel. Just in time, the maid Barbara came forward and respectfully handed him a towel. Gray took the towel, wiped the sweat off his forehead, and returned the towel to the maid, Barbara. He could clearly feel the Marquis daughter Polly's attention these past few days because her gaze would fall on him from time to time. Of course, he wasn't narcissistic enough to think that she had such thoughts about him. He guessed that she was paying attention to him because of his performance in the Viscount's battle at Sydney Castle. His performance at that time was indeed too eye-catching among the Viscount's descendants. But at that time, he didn't care so much because he wanted to fight for resources for the Fergus family. Right now, he was living in the Fergus family. The more benefits the Fergus family received from the Sydney family, the more benefits he would naturally receive. After returning from Sydney Castle, the blood supply of the Blood Fiends had been increased to once a week, and he had also received an additional bottle of concentrated potion that he might not be able to buy even if he had the gold coins. He hadn't consumed the concentrated potion yet, so he didn't know how effective it would be. But the increase in blood supply to once a week had undoubtedly increased his training speed. Gray passed by a house on his way to the castle's bathhouse. He hesitated for a moment, but eventually stopped and walked towards the house. The door of the house was open. Gray walked to the door and stuck his head in to look inside. He saw an old man in a gray robe with grizzled hair, busying himself with bottles and jars. This person was naturally the potion master Tulu. His hands were extremely nimble as they flew about, mixing the various liquids according to the ratio with great precision. The liquid he mixed bubbled with gurgling sounds. The color was light yellow at first, then slowly turned dark yellow, then light purple, and finally dark purple. Gray watched silently, his eyes filled with curiosity. Was this the process of a potion master refining potions? It was quite similar to chemistry experiments in his previous life, but the potion master's movements were too fast. Even with his eyesight as a high-rank blood warrior, he could only see a blur. Of course, this was only on the surface. According to what Gray knew, an alchemist needed to use the power of blood in conjunction with a special alchemy technique to act on the medicinal liquid. Moreover, every step of the process was different, and the technique would also be different. At this time, Tulu stopped and picked up the container containing the dark purple liquid. He frowned as he looked at it. No, it's not like this. The components are all calculated according to the formula, so there shouldn't be any mistakes. The problem must be with the steps. Which step is wrong? Tulu muttered to himself out of habit. Gray watched. Although he had done chemistry experiments in his previous life, it was only so. He could tell from his current situation after graduation that he couldn't see the problem. Gray! Someone called out to him from behind. Gray turned around and saw Polly walking towards him. His expression turned bitter. Sure enough, in the next moment, Kid, what are you standing at the door for? Tulu's voice sounded. Clearly, Tulu had noticed Gray's uninvited guest because of Polly's voice. Normally, Tulu would have noticed Gray easily with his strength, but he was too engrossed in his alchemy and didn't notice Gray's presence at first. My apologies, Master Tulu. I was curious about how potion masters refine, so I couldn't help but want to take a look. Gray said cautiously. Master Tulu didn't have a good personality, so he naturally didn't want to offend him. Otherwise, Master Tulu might get angry and slap him. After all, to a certain extent, he was already peeping on Master Tulu. Tulu wasn't a good-tempered person. He wanted to mock Gray, but he gave up on that thought when he remembered that he was still living with the Fergus family. Moreover, it wouldn't be easy for others to steal his alchemy skills. If someone were to steal his alchemy skills, then his title as a potion master would be worthless. Polly knew that she almost caused Gray to be scolded because of her. She walked over and said embarrassedly, "Gray, you want to learn alchemy?" "Yes, but I don't have the talent for it." Gray shrugged helplessly. "Kid, at least you know your own limits." Tulu sneered. If one wanted to become an alchemist and have great achievements in alchemy, talent was essential. Without talent, one's achievements would be limited no matter how hard one worked. As for those who were active in the cities and could prescribe medicine for cold and bruises, they couldn't even be considered an alchemist. They were just ordinary people who knew a few recipes. If one wanted to become an alchemist, they had to have the ability to research and develop potions independently. If one wanted to become an alchemist, they had to have the ability to research potions. "Miss Polly, have you finished your cultivation?" Gray looked at Polly when he saw that Tulu didn't intend to cause trouble for him. "Yes, I just finished my cultivation." Polly nodded and looked at the purple potion container in Tulu's hand. "Teacher, how is it? Did you reconstruct the beast-controlling potion?" Just a little bit more." Grandmaster Tulu, who was overbearing just a moment ago, instantly became embarrassed. He probably didn't expect that even after knowing the composition of the medicine and analyzing the approximate refining steps, he still couldn't restore the beast-controlling elixir after spending a few days on it. Thinking of this, he looked at Gray and asked, "Kid, did you take any alchemy tools when you entered the wooden house last time?" "No, we only took a manuscript, a blood spell called Wood Monkey, and a few bottles of solution." Gray carefully recalled. He wasn't afraid that the other party would have thoughts of robbing him after hearing about the blood technique, Wood Monkey. A blood technique like Wood Monkey could only be considered an ordinary blood technique, and there were many clans that possessed it. It was extremely precious to ordinary people, but to Master Tulu and Marquis daughter Polly, its value was extremely low. The Marquis family should have this blood spell. But when we went there, the room was moved. I don't know if the person took any tools when they left. Gray wasn't sure. There were too many tools on the table, and they didn't pay much attention to them. Therefore, they didn't know if any of the tools were taken the second time they went there. "Brat, ask Viscount Fergus to help me find out who went to the wooden house and whether they took anything. If they did, bring it back." Tulu ordered. "Okay, I'll tell Father when we get back." Gray nodded. "Teacher, as for the steps, you have already tried all the steps that you can think of. Could it be that the ingredients and proportions of the herbs are wrong?" Polly frowned. "I calculated the ingredients and proportions according to the manuscript, so there shouldn't be any problems." Tulu put down the bottle and shook his head. Could McCarthy Thompson have purposely omitted or added some ingredients to the manuscript in order to prevent the beast-controlling elixir's formula from being snatched away? Polly said, "Purposely left out or added ingredients?" Tulu rested his chin on his hand and thought. Chapter 114. The Fergus family's living room. After staying in Master Tulu's alchemy room for a while, Gray and Polly arrived at the room after instructing the servants to pass on Master Tulu's request to Viscount Fergus. In the room, Bernal, Elise, Caroline, and Sarah were all present. "Sister Polly, you're a middle-rank blood warrior?" Sarah asked curiously when she saw Polly enter the room. She must have heard about it from Bernal and the others. As for Bernal and the others, it was not difficult for them to see Polly's current realm because they had cultivated together with her. "Yes, how is it? Amazing, right?" Polly joked. "Yes, amazing," Sarah said after thinking carefully. "But a little worse than my brother." Polly couldn't help but feel proud when she heard the first half of Sarah's words. Although she wasn't a vain person, she still couldn't help but feel happy when praised. But when she heard the second half, she was so depressed that she almost vomited blood. She couldn't help but glare at Gray fiercely. "Gray, I want to duel with you." There's no need, right?" Gray scratched his head in distress. Why did this fire suddenly ignite and even spread to him? Although he was also very curious about the Sidney family's special blood arts, he had no intention of dueling with Polly. It wasn't because she was a woman or anything like that. The strength of those who cultivated blood arts didn't depend on their gender, but on the blood arts and realm they cultivated. Therefore, there wasn't much difference between men and women when it came to cultivating blood arts. Women rarely cultivated blood arts among lesser nobles because they would be married off. Even if they were groomed, they would be groomed by others. Therefore, many lesser nobles were unwilling to let women cultivate blood arts. And the reason he refused was because he was already a high-rank blood warrior. If he fought with her, he would have to suppress his strength and couldn't reveal the characteristics of the blood fiends he had obtained from consuming blood fiends' blood. The battle would be really boring. No, you have to fight with me, Polly said with a rare air of arrogance. Of course, it was just an act. I want to let Sarah know whether her brother or I am better. Gray felt a headache coming on. He really didn't want to fight Polly, but looking at Polly's attitude, it was clear that he had to fight. Miss Polly, let me be your opponent. Seeing that Gray really didn't want to fight, Bernal helped Gray out. All right, you're Sarah's brother anyway. Seeing that Gray was unwilling to make a move, Polly had no choice but to give up and target Bernal. Naturally, the others would not let go of such an opportunity to watch the battle. Thus, everyone left the living room and walked through the corridor to the white stone training grounds. They went to the weapons rack and chose their weapons. Bernal chose an ironwood sword, while Polly chose an ironwood saber. Whoosh! Knowing that the Sidney family cultivated a special blood technique that was stronger than ordinary blood techniques, Bernal did not hold back and took the initiative to attack. His legs stepped on the white stone and his figure shot out, quickly pouncing toward Polly. Just as he was about to reach Polly, he suddenly turned and slid in an arc to Polly's side. Then he slashed his sword at Polly from the side. His movements were smooth and extremely swift, fully displaying the Windwolf speed. Clearly, Bernal had practiced this combat method many times. Whoosh! Just as Bernal's sword was about to hit Polly, Polly suddenly turned around and slashed at Bernal's sword. Bang! The saber and sword clashed. Pa pa pa! One figure did not move at all, while the other figure retreated rapidly. After retreating for more than a dozen steps, he finally dissipated the huge force from the weapon. The one who did not move at all was Polly, while the one who had retreated for more than a dozen steps was Bernal. What a fast speed, what a powerful strength! Gray, who was watching from the side, was inwardly shocked. In terms of speed, even if Polly was not as fast as Bernal, she was not far behind. And in terms of power, Polly far surpassed Bernal. Just from the fact that she was able to push Bernal back more than a dozen steps, it could be seen how powerful her saber was. And these two aspects are not the most powerful aspect of the Sidney family's special blood technique. I heard that the Sidney family's special blood technique is most powerful in terms of defense. Is this the power of the special blood technique? Although Gray had tried his best to overestimate the special blood technique, only now did he realize that he had still underestimated it. If he was the one fighting at the same level, he would definitely lose if he did not use Hanhu's power. Even if he used Hanhu's power, he did not have absolute confidence that he would be able to defeat his opponent. After all, his opponent's strongest point was still her defense. Like Gray, Caroline and Elise also looked at Polly in shock. Was this the power of the special blood technique? Although they already knew that the special blood technique was extremely powerful, wasn't this too powerful? On the other hand, Sarah did not understand the intricacies of the blood technique because she had not yet cultivated it. She looked at the two of them curiously, waiting for the outcome of the battle to be decided. Pung! After splitting Bernal's leg with her saber, Polly fiercely stomped on the ground. The ground seemed to tremble slightly, and then she sped toward Bernal. If Bernal's movements were described as nimble like a sports car, then Polly's movements were like a rampaging armored vehicle. Although his speed may be slower than Bonner's, he had an indomitable aura. Whoosh! Knowing that Polly was extremely powerful, Bernal did not dare to clash head-on with her. He increased his speed to the maximum and circled to Polly's side. However, just as he circled to Polly's side, Polly suddenly turned around and faced Bernal again. The saber in her hand slashed out aggressively, and a violent whistling sound immediately rang out. Not good. Sensing the power of the saber, Bernal knew that things were not good. He hurriedly used the power of blood and increased his speed to the maximum, dodging the attack with a whoosh. The saber continued to slash down without slowing down, hitting the white stone slabs on the ground. Crack! Several stone slabs were directly split in half by the saber, and the dirt beneath the slabs flew everywhere. Polly quickly stood up, turned around, and slashed out again. Pum! Bernal, who had just used the power of blood to appear behind Polly, had his sword blocked and was forced to retreat again. Although Polly was slower than Bernal in terms of speed, the difference was very small. The time Bernal took to circle behind her was enough for her to turn around and face Bernal again. Whoosh! After forcing Bernal to retreat, Polly once again charged at Bernal like an armored vehicle. Bernal could only temporarily avoid the attack and hide to the side. Pung, 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 pata. After several exchanges, Bernal's hands became more and more numb. Finally, he could not hold his weapon steadily. The weapon fell, and the battle was declared over. An overwhelming victory. In the end, Polly defeated Bernal with an overwhelming victory. Although it was obvious that her combat experience was not as good as Bernal's, her overall strength allowed her to easily win. This was the power of the special blood technique. Miss Polly is amazing, Bernal said with a wry smile as he picked up the saber that had fallen. I only took advantage of the blood technique. Polly shook her head. She put the ironwood saber back on a weapon rack and walked in front of the dazed Sarah. She smiled and waved her finger in front of her eyes. How is it? Do you know how powerful I am now? Yes. Sarah nodded subconsciously. Then, who is more powerful, me or your brother? Polly said proudly. Sarah's gaze moved back and forth between Polly and Gray. For a moment, she was not as certain as before. Her brother was very powerful and had once defeated Brother Bernal. However, Sister Polly had also defeated Brother Bernal. Moreover, she seemed to be very powerful as well. This made her unable to decide who was stronger. All right, I won't make things difficult for you. Bernal shrugged and did not pursue the matter. He looked at Gray provocatively. How about it? Do you want to fight me? No. Gray shook his head. Unless he was prepared to use Hanhu's strength, he would definitely lose. In a hotel in Fergus City, the 5 men in black who had visited the wooden house took off their black shadows and changed into ordinary clothes. Captain, the situation is a bit complicated. The daughter of Marquis Sidney, the Sidney family's master of medicine, is also in Fergus Castle. An ordinary-looking woman said, I suspect that the formula of the beast-controlling elixir has already fallen into the hands of the Sidney family's master of medicine. It's not a possibility, it's a certainty, a man with a beard on his chin said. I've already found out that the Fergus family once brought 2 people to McCarthy Thompson's residence in the Black Earth Forest. These 2 people clearly came for the beast-controlling elixir. Captain, we don't have full confidence in dealing with the people brought by the Fergus family and the Sidney family. It seems that we can only wait for the Sidney family to leave and ambush them halfway. Another man said, No, I've already decided to do it tonight. The man with purple hair with a scar on his face shook his head. Captain, isn't this too hasty? The last person said doubtfully. The other teams have already started. It won't be long before the news reaches the Sidney family. At that time, the Sidney family will definitely send reinforcements. The man with purple hair with a scar on his face said. Chapter 115. After finishing his cultivation in the afternoon, Gray headed to the library as he had nothing to do. He had already flipped through all the books in the library that were related to the general knowledge of the continent. As for other miscellaneous books, such as travel notes and biographies, he was not very interested in them, so he did not go to the library as frequently as before. Gently pushing open the door of the library, Gray looked towards the white round table on the right side of the library. As expected, Caroline was sitting there quietly, holding a book and reading it with great interest. She was wearing a blue pleated dress, her legs elegantly folded together. Her brown hair was tied into a ponytail, and her blue eyes stared intently at the words in the book. Occasionally, her face would reveal an expression of sudden understanding. Unlike Gray's rough way of reading with a strong sense of purpose, she preferred to study the sentences and vocabulary in the book word by word. She read more carefully than Gray. Beside the round table, there was another person besides Caroline. This person was wearing a white pleated dress. Her face was well-proportioned, and her skin was fair and delicate. She had a head of long golden hair that was currently draped over her shoulders. A cool breeze blew in from the window, causing the golden hair to flutter slightly. This person was naturally Polly. Gray's entrance was immediately noticed by Caroline and Polly. Both of them raised their heads to look at Gray. Caroline nodded slightly, while Polly asked curiously, "Why are you here?" She had not seen Gray come to the library in the past few days in the castle. Now that she suddenly saw him, she could not help but feel curious. Hearing her words, Gray immediately guessed that in her eyes, he might have formed the impression that he was ignorant and incompetent and not fated with books. He did not explain and shrugged. "I was a bit bored, so I came to look for a book to read." "Understood. Do you need me to recommend you?" Polly said to Gray with an expression that said, "I am more familiar with this place than you are." There's no need." Gray rolled his eyes inwardly. How many days has this young lady lived in Fergus Castle? At the very most, he had only been to the library a few times. In terms of familiarity with the books in a library, how could he be more familiar with them than him? This young lady was not polite at all. She actually had the guts to recommend a book for him. "You're welcome." Although among the people present, Caroline was the most familiar with the library, she knew that Gray and Caroline were not born of the same father and mother, so their relationship might not be good. Therefore, Polly took the initiative to take on the important task of recommending books to Gray. "There's really no need." Gray blushed with shame in his heart. He really didn't hold back. He came to the library just to pick a book that he wanted to read. If Polly recommended a book that he wanted to read, it would be fine. But if she recommended a book that he didn't want to read and he couldn't refuse, then he would probably be depressed this afternoon. "All right then, let me know if you can't find a suitable one. I'll recommend one to you." Seeing Gray refuse again and again, Polly could only nod. "Okay." Gray finally breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. At this moment, Caroline raised her head. She first glanced at Polly, then her strange gaze fixed on Gray. Seeing the other party looking over, Gray cast a dissatisfied look, complaining that the other party didn't explain for him. Caroline, on the other hand, smiled slightly, then immediately lowered her head and looked at her book. Seeing her like this, Gray couldn't help but smile. He didn't expect his sister to have such a demonic side. Gray found the bookshelf that stored blood techniques. After some selection, he found a book called Blood Beast Mutation. Holding this book, Gray came to the white round table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. He flipped open the book and was about to flip through it when he immediately smelled a faint fragrance coming from the side. Turning his head, he saw Polly, who was not far from him, looking in his direction. A strand of golden hair slid down on the white round table, as soft as golden silk. "You like this kind of book?" Polly wrinkled her nose and asked. "Yes, I'm very curious about blood beasts." Gray nodded. His metamorphosis ability was related to blood beasts, and only the blood of blood beasts could accelerate his metamorphosis. Thus, he wanted to store as much knowledge about blood beasts as possible. Curious about what? Polly couldn't help but ask. "I'm curious about their strange abilities, as well as the evolution and deterioration of their bloodlines." Gray thought for a moment and said, "I see. There are many books about this in Sydney Castle. Yes, if you come to Sydney Castle next time, I'll bring you to take a look." "Thank you very much." Gray thanked her. The Sydney family's library was definitely bigger than the Fergus family's library. There must be more books. Perhaps he could find a description of his current situation from these books. After a few more words, the two ended their conversation and began to read their respective books. As the pages of the book flipped, Gray couldn't help but be gradually attracted to the contents of the book. The Mutation of Blood Beasts was a book that introduced the mutation of blood beasts. A mutation, simply put, was a change in a certain aspect of a blood beast's abilities. For example, they were stronger than blood beasts of the same species. For example, they were faster than blood beasts of the same species. For example, they were faster than blood beasts of the same species. There were many types of mutations. Of course, not only were there good mutations, there were also some mutations that had negative effects on blood beasts. For example, a blood beast's abilities were weaker than a blood beast of the same species. The entire book was a record of this phenomenon, as well as the author's own speculations about this phenomenon. Mutation is an incomplete state of evolution and deterioration of the bloodline. Unknowingly, Gray was already resting his chin on one hand as he pondered the author's speculations. According to the author of this book, the mutation of blood beasts was a special situation caused by incomplete evolution and deterioration of the bloodline. Simply put, during the evolution of the bloodline, only some of its characteristics had evolved, but there were still some that hadn't. As a result, these blood beasts were stronger than blood beasts of the same species, but not as powerful as blood beasts of higher sequence. It was the same when the bloodline deteriorated. Some of its body characteristics had deteriorated, but there were still some that hadn't deteriorated. As a result, these blood beasts were weaker than blood beasts of the same species, but stronger than blood beasts of lower sequence. Is that really the case? Gray raised his eyebrows. The author of this book's point of view was very different from the understanding of mutation that he had formed in his previous life. According to his previous life, mutation was a difference between different generations or between different individuals of the same generation in terms of morphological characteristics, physiological characteristics, and so on. This kind of mutation was strange of every description, and there was no clear direction. However, according to the author of this book, there was a direction to mutation. It was either towards higher sequence blood beasts or towards lower sequence blood beasts. Because the direction was fixed, to a certain extent, this could no longer be called a mutation. After all, the main characteristic of a mutation was that it was random and had no direction. This point of view, there's a problem, but I know too little about mutation. I've never even come into contact with it. Gray shook his head. Adhering to the common sense formed by mutation in his previous life, he didn't agree with the author of this book's point of view. However, the mutation that he knew was only from books. He hadn't actually experienced it, so he couldn't produce strong evidence to refute the author's point of view. As for the mutation of the recovery speed of his blood force in his body, it was just a fake. His blood force recovery speed wasn't much different from Bernal and the others. The reason why Viscount Fergus and the others thought so was because he had Hanhu's strength characteristics and didn't use his blood force in battle. Time passed unknowingly, and soon the sky was getting dark. In the evening, a servant had already come to inform them to go for dinner. Gray, Caroline, and Polly stood up together and walked towards the dining hall. They walked up the stairs on the second floor and arrived at the hall on the first floor. From the hall to the left, they passed through a passageway and arrived at the entrance of the dining hall. Grimm's gaze casually looked into the dining hall. The next moment, his heart suddenly thumped and cold sweat faintly slid down his forehead. In a corner of the dining hall, blocked by a standing cabinet, a blurry figure half-crouched in a shadowy place appeared there. Servants walked in and out of the dining hall. Some of them passed by less than half a meter away from the figure, but none of the servants discovered the figure. It was as if the figure could only be seen by him. The answer was obvious. The figure must have used some kind of ability to hide in the shadows, hiding his figure in the shadows so that others couldn't see him at all. The reason why he could see the figure was naturally because of the infrared perception he'd obtained after swallowing the shadow snake's blood. Chapter 116. His heart pounded as he forced himself to maintain a calm expression. Gray's gaze casually swept around the dining hall, and the shock in his heart grew even stronger. 1, 2, 3, 5. There were 5 people hiding in each corner of the dining hall. All 5 of them could use the ability to hide in the shadows. In other words, they were at least vicious warriors. 5 ferocious blood warriors, a full 5 ferocious blood warriors. Viscount Fergus was only a ferocious blood warrior, but there were 5 ferocious blood warriors in the restaurant. A sure kill situation. This word flashed through Gray's mind. He almost couldn't help but run away. Since there were 5 people lying in ambush here, then there might be an ambush outside the castle as well. No, there might still be a chance. Viscount Fergus can block one, the city family's guard captain can block one, and the other guards can block one. Master Tulu should be able to block 2. Everything happened in a flash. When Gray thought it through, Caroline and Polly, who were slightly behind Gray, had already entered the dining hall. Gray forced himself to calm down. At a time like this, he couldn't show the slightest bit of panic. Otherwise, if he was discovered by these assassins, they would definitely launch an assassination in advance. He turned to look at Caroline and Polly. "Miss Polly, I want to ask for your help." "Help? What kind of help?" Polly looked at Gray in puzzlement. These days in Fergus Castle were quite pleasant. If Gray's request wasn't too big, then she didn't mind helping him. "I want to ask you to let Master Tulu talk here." Gray didn't want too many people to know and signaled for Polly to follow him out of the dining hall. Polly frowned. She didn't dare to guarantee anything when it came to Master Tulu. After all, Master Tulu didn't even give face to her father. However, she still followed Gray out of the dining hall. "Green, what do you want to do?" Polly said with a slight frown as she followed Gray out of the restaurant and walked along the corridor for a while. But halfway through her words, she suddenly stopped because she saw Gray turn his head with an extremely serious expression, and there was even a faint sweat on his forehead. It was the beginning of spring, and at this time in the evening, the weather was cooler, and one would even need to add more clothes. However, the other party was actually sweating at this time, which was obviously very abnormal. "What's going on, Gray?" Polly couldn't help but worry. Gray looked around and confirmed that there were no assassins hiding in the shadows before he spoke in a deep voice. "There's an assassin in the restaurant." "What?" Polly subconsciously wanted to cry out in alarm, but she immediately reacted and hurriedly covered her red lips with her hand. "Gray, are you kidding me?" "I'm not joking," Gray said solemnly. The assassin was hiding in the shadow of a cabinet. In order to avoid the servants, he moved a bit, and I just happened to see him. I don't know if there's anyone hiding in the shadows, but just in case, we'll inform the guards first. You go in and inform Master Tulu, and I'll go in and inform my father." A moment later, Gray and Polly walked into the restaurant, trying their best to maintain a calm expression. The others in the restaurant looked at the two of them curiously. Although they were curious as to why Gray had asked Polly for help, seeing that Gray didn't want others to know, they naturally didn't ask. Polly walked to Master Tulu's side and sat down. Gray looked around and saw that the seat next to Viscount Fergus was still empty, so he walked over and sat down. Viscount Fergus was a bit confused when he saw Gray take the initiative to sit next to him, but he didn't pay too much attention to it. Gray's gaze flickered as he considered how he should inform Viscount Fergus of the news. Looking at the plate of jam on the side, he had an idea. He dipped his finger into the jam and slid his hand across the dining table. He wasn't afraid that the 5 assassins would notice his movements. With the people around the table and the 5 people hiding in the shadows, they couldn't see the situation at the table. Viscount Fergus raised his eyebrows when he saw Gray scribbling on the table. It was very rude to do such a thing in the presence of outsiders. However, his pupils suddenly shrank in the next moment. Assassin. It was because Gray's scribbles formed the word assassin. As a Viscount, Viscount Fergus had seen a lot of things. Although he was surprised, he still maintained a calm expression. At this time, Gray wrote another word. Shadow. Viscount Fergus's expression didn't change when he heard Gray's hint. Instead, he looked around the dining room. The shadow ability was a concealment ability that hid one's body in the shadows. There were some differences between a real shadow and a real shadow. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to notice it. But if one looked carefully, they would be able to notice it. As expected, Viscount Fergus immediately detected the abnormality in the shadows after sweeping his gaze around the dining hall and confirmed that Gray's information was correct. He couldn't help but look at Master Tulu. Master Tulu was also looking at him. Both of their eyes flashed. They instantly understood that the other party knew. Whoosh! Suddenly, both of them moved at the same time. Huh! A green windblade was spat out from Viscount Fergus's mouth. Suddenly, he saw an assassin in the shadows. Master Tulu, on the other hand, pounced on a shadowy spot where someone was hiding and smashed his fist down. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The 5 hiding in the shadows didn't expect Viscount Fergus and Master Tulu to suddenly attack. Their reactions were naturally slower by half a beat. Whoosh! A black-clothed figure flashed out from the shadow where Viscount Fergus's windblade was aimed at. He dodged to the side, but he couldn't dodge it completely. His left hand was hit by the wind blade. Puff! His left wrist was directly cut off by the sharp wind blade. Bright red blood spurted out and sprayed several meters away, dyeing the surroundings red. Boom! Master Tulu's attack was aimed at a black-clothed figure. After a muffled sound, a black-clothed figure retreated and smashed the decorations against the wall. Although the black-clothed figure was hit by Master Tulu's sneak attack, he wasn't heavily injured. This meant he was as strong as Master Tulu. Whoosh! Whoosh! As Viscount Fergus and Master Tulu attacked, the other 3 people hiding in the corner also charged out. One of them charged at Viscount Fergus while the other 2 charged at Master Tulu. Whoosh! 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 But at this moment, people rushed in from the various entrances of the restaurant. They were the 8 guards of the Sidney family in Lordland. Master Tulu was fighting with a black-clothed figure, Viscount Fergus was fighting with the black-clothed figure, and the other 3 black-clothed figures were fighting with the Sidney family guards in Lordland. The dining hall was in chaos. Due to the roaring sound of fighting, various pieces of furniture flew everywhere. In addition to Gray and Polly, who already knew about this, Madame Milan, Bernal, and the servants beside them were all shocked. They looked at the sudden battle scene in panic. A few panicked servants turned around and tried to run out of the restaurant, but they were caught in the crossfire of the battle. A catastrophic scene was happening in the restaurant. A black-clothed figure was slapped away by a black-clothed figure and hit the wall. A black-clothed figure was hit by a retreating guard and rolled on the ground. One of them was stabbed in the stomach by a wooden stake thrown by Master Tulu and the black man. Whoosh! After Viscount Fergus and Master Tulu moved, Gray also moved. He pulled out a wooden chair and filled his legs with blood energy. His legs suddenly expanded, and his speed increased to the maximum. In the blink of an eye, he crossed the distance of several meters and came to Sarah's side, protecting her behind him. Aside from the servants, only Sarah and Madame de Milan were left in the hall. They were the weakest people who didn't cultivate blood arts and were the most vulnerable to the battle. If he had to choose between the 2, Gray would naturally choose to protect Sarah. As for Madame de Milan, he didn't mind protecting her if he had the ability. But now, he obviously didn't have that ability. He also saw that Bernal and his siblings had already surrounded Madame de Milan. Whoosh! The weakest people fighting in the restaurant were high-ranking blood warriors. The aftermath of the battle was naturally very powerful. A piece of broken furniture flew toward Gray. It was caused by a black-clothed figure and the captain of the Sidney family guards. One could imagine how powerful it was. Previously, a servant had been directly pierced by such a piece of furniture. The power of blood poured into his right hand, and Gray's right hand suddenly swelled up as he punched out. Boom! The broken furniture was smashed into pieces by Gray's punch. Hanhu's strength attribute and Shadow Snake's defense attribute allowed him to easily block this piece of furniture. His gaze swept over Polly, Bernal, and the others as he shouted, "Charge out!" Then, he picked up Sarah, who was trembling with fear and trembling slightly, with one hand and quickly rushed towards one of the restaurant's exits. All the shockwaves from the battle were easily blocked by him with a single punch. His combat power was not at all inferior to a high-ranking blood warrior like Lord Lind. Chapter 117. With Gray, who was known for his strength even among the upper-level blood warriors, leading the way, Polly, Bogner, and the others safely rushed out of the restaurant. Asterisk pa, pa, pa. Asterisk, a large number of soldiers surrounded them, protecting them. They had all rushed over after hearing the commotion. To avoid alerting the assassins, Gray and Polly only informed the 8 guards of the Sidney family and Lord Linda. Go to the basement, Bernal ordered, and the soldiers protected everyone as they headed to the basement of the castle. The basement of the castle was a building specially prepared for emergencies like this. It had a gate and was extremely sturdy, making it easy to defend and difficult to attack. Moreover, there were rations and water inside, enough to keep a few hundred people inside for half a month. Moreover, there was a tunnel in the basement that led outside the castle. In an emergency, they could escape from here. Entering the basement, Everyone let out a sigh of relief. There were many soldiers protecting them, and the terrain was easy to defend and difficult to attack. Even the ferocious warriors would not be able to break in quickly. Who are those people? Madame de Milan's face was deathly pale, still in a state of shock. No one could answer her question. Even Gray, who was the first to discover these black-clothed people, could not answer this question. He only knew that these people were hiding in the restaurant, but he did not know who they were and why they wanted to assassinate the Fergus family. Gray, do you know something? Caroline's face was also somewhat pale. Thinking of how Gray had taken the initiative to sit next to Viscount Fergus, she looked at Gray and asked, I don't know either. Comforting Sarah, Gray bitterly smiled and shook his head. I only discovered that there were assassins in the restaurant, but I don't know who they are. From the commotion just now, 4 of the 5 assassins were ferocious warriors, and the last one was of the same rank as Master Tulu and was clearly stronger than the ferocious warriors. He should be a berserk warrior. He really did not expect that a small family like the Fergus family, whose strongest was a ferocious warrior, would attract 5 assassins. If it weren't for Master Tulu and the Marquis' daughter, Polly, who happened to be in Fergus Castle, the Fergus family might have been doomed. Polly frowned and said after a moment of hesitation, they might have been attracted by the beast-controlling potion. Beast-controlling medicine? Bernal was puzzled. But Miss Polly, our Fergus family didn't get the formula for the beast-controlling potion. Those people didn't know that, but because McCarthy Thompson was killed by the Fergus family, they thought that the beast-controlling medicine was in the hands of the Fergus family. Polly guessed. I'll go help. Gray stroked Sarah's head, who was trembling slightly. After a moment of hesitation, he turned around and walked outside. Regardless of whether Polly's guess was correct and the assassin had arrived, he was considered one of the top fighters among the high-ranking blood warriors. Naturally, he needed to contribute at this time. Otherwise, if Viscount Fergus and the others were defeated, everyone here, including himself, might not be able to survive. As for escaping, Gray didn't think there was much of a chance of escaping when faced with existences whose strength surpassed the ferocious warriors. Brother, Gray, Bernal, and the others wanted to call out to Gray. After all, with Gray's strength as a middle-ranking blood warrior, he wouldn't be of much help in a battle of that level. However, they were surprised to find that Gray was extremely fast. In a few moments, he had already disappeared from their line of sight. How could he be so fast? Elise was puzzled. Although he wasn't a middle-ranking blood warrior, he had been in contact with the middle-ranking blood warrior Bernal for a long time. How could he not understand how fast a middle-ranking blood warrior should be? The speed that Gray displayed just now definitely surpassed that of a middle-ranking blood warrior. He should have already reached high-ranking blood warrior. There was a trace of amazement in Polly's voice. Previously in the dining hall, she had already vaguely felt that Gray's speed and combat strength were different. Now, Polly was finally certain that Gray's strength had already reached that of a high-ranking blood warrior. She also finally understood why Gray had rejected her invitation to battle this morning. Obviously, the other party didn't want to rely on the strength of a high-ranking blood warrior to fight her. High-ranking blood warrior? Bernal had also vaguely guessed before. Now that he heard confirmation from Polly, he still couldn't help but be shocked. How long had it been since Gray became a middle-ranking blood warrior? Now he was actually already a high-ranking blood warrior. This rate of growth. Caroline, Elise, Madame de Milan, and Sarah were all stunned. They almost thought that they had misheard. It took them a while to react, but their eyes were still filled with disbelief. Gray was already a high-ranking blood warrior. After leaving the basement, Gray rushed towards the dining hall. When he got closer, he saw that the windows and walls of the dining hall had already been shattered. The 2 parties who were fighting had already appeared outside the dining hall. At this moment, in the garden outside the dining hall, under the faint yellow light of the night, 5 assassins, Viscount Fergus, Master Tulu, and the others were engaged in a fierce battle. The fiercest battle was between Master Tulu and a purple-haired assassin dressed in black. Master Tulu probably practiced some kind of blood spell that could control plants. With a light stomp on the ground, all the plants in the garden suddenly grew wildly and rushed towards the purple-haired assassin. Meanwhile, the purple-haired assassin wielded two short knives. He was so fast that only afterimages could be seen. The various plants that rushed towards him were easily cut down by him. Moreover, any plant that was cut by the short knives would quickly corrode and turn black at the roots. It was unknown whether this was an ability or the purple-haired man's short knives had an innate ability. Elsewhere, Viscount Fergus and the captain of the Sidney family's guards were each fighting a black-clothed man. The other 8, including Lord Lind, were attacking the remaining 2 assassins. One of the assassins had his left arm cut off by Viscount Fergus at the beginning. His arm was still bleeding, and he was successfully surrounded by Lord Lind and the other 3 guards. And in another direction, there was a female assassin fighting with 4 guards of the Sidney family. No, 3 guards. Not good. Holding a sword that he had obtained from a soldier, Gray rushed in this direction. When Gray and the others had left, there had been a total of 4 guards fighting with this female assassin. But now, there were only 3 of them, and all 3 of them were injured. The condition of the last one was self-evident. Clang! There was a sharp sound of collision, and one of the guards who was attacking the female assassin was knocked back. The wound on his chest was bleeding profusely, and his face was turning paler and paler. Pung! The female assassin stomped her foot and suddenly shot out, pouncing towards the guard with a wound on his chest like a leopard hunting its prey. Not good! The other 2 guards cried out and tried to stop the female assassin. However, the female assassin nimbly twisted her body twice and dodged them. There were no more obstructions as the female assassin pounced towards the injured guard. She had 3 sharp claws on her hand and quickly slashed towards the guard's throat. The guard with the wound on his chest couldn't even stabilize himself from the impact, much less dodge. He could only watch as the female assassin's sharp claws slashed at his throat. Whoosh! The shadow of a sword suddenly appeared and slashed towards the female assassin's waist from the side. The sword whistled, and the sound of air being torn apart could be heard. Hearing this sound, the female assassin's hair stood on end. The power of this sword was not far from the ferocious blood warriors. If she was hit, even if she didn't die, she would be heavily injured. He retracted the sharp claw that was aimed at the guard with an injury on his chest and crossed it with the sharp claw on his other hand to form an X shape, blocking the sword that was coming at him. Clang! The sword and the crossed claws collided. In the night that was about to turn dark, a large amount of sparks blossomed. Pa! 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 The female assassin was forced back several steps by the force of the sword. Opposite her was Gray, who had also been forced back several steps. Gray had used the power of blood to increase the strength of his arm. Moreover, the female assassin had hastily blocked his attack, resulting in a stalemate between them. Behind the female assassin, the 2 guards had caught up. Although they were surprised by Gray's appearance, they did not hesitate. Pooh! They raised their weapons and slashed at the female assassin. The female assassin dodged to the side, but her back was grazed by the other guard's attack. Her black clothes were immediately dyed red, but because it was too dark, it was impossible to see that it was red. You're courting death. The pain from her back caused a savage expression to appear on the female assassin's ordinary face. She steadied herself and used one of her claws to block the weapon of the guard who had slashed at her, while the other stabbed towards the chest of the guard who had slashed at her. Whoosh! But in the next moment, the female assassin quickly retreated as if she had encountered a snake. This was because a sword was already slashing at her from behind. She saw that Gray, who had been behind her, had appeared behind the guard at some point in time and was slashing at her with his sword. What speed! She had not expected Gray to be so fast despite his great strength. As this thought flashed through her mind, the female assassin poured the power of blood into her legs and retreated, using her claws to block her chest. But before her sharp claws could protect her chest, the long sword had already slashed through her chest. Pooh! Dark red blood splattered. In the evening, it was as dark as ink. If not for the thick metallic smell, one would have thought that it was ink. The female assassin grunted and retreated, leaving behind a long trail of blood. Before the sword slashed at her, she had already retreated rapidly. Although she could not completely avoid it, she had managed to avoid part of it. The injury caused by Gray's slash was not considered serious, but her heart was already burning with rage. She had actually been injured under the siege of 4 high-ranked blood warriors, and she had been injured twice in a row. This made her angry, but at the same time, she was faintly shocked. Her gaze was slightly wary as she looked at the youth who had appeared last. Chapter 118. Whoosh! The guard with an injury on his chest attacked the female assassin from behind, but she dodged to the side. Whoosh! After dodging the guard's attack, the female assassin pounced at Gray with cold, killing intent in her eyes. Without a doubt, among the 4 people surrounding her, Gray posed the greatest threat to her. He had already caused her to be injured twice, so she decided to take care of Gray first. Swish! As she approached Gray, she extended her 2 sharp claws and viciously attacked Gray. One of them was aimed at Gray's throat, while the other was aimed at Gray's heart. These 2 places were the vital parts of the human body. No matter which part of the body was injured, it would definitely result in death. The female assassin was dressed in black, and her 2 sharp claws were made of some kind of metal that did not reflect light. Under the dim sky, she completely blended into the darkness, making her even more difficult to defend against. Pung! Blood energy poured into his legs, and at the critical moment, Gray took a step forward and dodged the attack. His infrared perception allowed him to clearly see the female assassin. Her every movement could not escape his sight. After dodging the attack of the female assassin's 2 sharp claws, Gray's longsword swept towards the female assassin from the side. Whoosh! Under the dim sky, the bright longsword was like the last ray of light before the dark night. It slashed towards the female assassin. Ding! Metal collided, and then a figure was forced to hastily retreat. This figure was Gray. With Gray's current strength, he could indeed achieve unexpected results when the female assassin was caught off guard. However, when the female assassin focused all her attention on him, he was immediately at a disadvantage. After all, in terms of strength, he was definitely weaker than the female assassin. Whoosh! After pushing Gray back, the female assassin stomped on the ground and shot out, pouncing towards Gray again. Whoosh! Whoosh! However, at this moment, 2 cold lights flashed, forcing the female assassin to stop and dodge. The 2 guards arrived and surrounded the female assassin, helping Gray out of the situation. Ding! Ding! The female assassin blocked the attacks of the 2 guards with her sharp claws. Whoosh! When she was about to attack Gray again, she realized that Gray had already disappeared. At the same time, she heard the sound of air being torn apart behind her. She quickly turned around and crossed her 2 sharp claws in front of her chest. In the next moment, she blocked in front of her body. Clang! Metal weapons collided with metal weapons, creating dazzling sparks. The 2 sharp claws in her hands blocked Gray's slash from behind. Oof. But in the next moment, she couldn't help but groan and retreat. Because just a moment ago, when the sword and the sharp claws were in a stalemate, a leg and a boot kicked her stomach from below. Swish, swish. That was not the end of it. Just as she lost control of her body and retreated backwards, 2 cold lights flashed from behind her and ruthlessly slashed towards her back. Puff, puff. 2 muffled sounds of weapons cutting into flesh rang out, and 2 more wounds appeared on her back. Ding! 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 Dark red blood continued to flow out. Although she tried her best to dodge, she still couldn't avoid it. She was so angry that she went crazy. She kicked the guard on her left and stabbed her sharp claws towards the guard on her right. Puff! With a muffled sound, 3 holes were opened in the stomach of the guard on the right. Blood immediately gushed out. The injured guard retreated pathetically. The female assassin's eyes were cold, and she sneered. Her other sharp claw pierced towards the guard's chest. Puff! The sound of sharp blade piercing into flesh rang out clearly. The female assassin's sharp claw that was piercing towards the injured guard's chest suddenly froze, stopping just a few centimeters away from the guard's chest. And at this moment, the cold tip of a sword pierced through the female assassin's chest. It was a hair-raising sight. At this critical moment, Gray caught up and pierced the female assassin's back with his longsword. Finally, the longsword pierced through her chest. Her chest and back were bleeding profusely. Large amounts of blood also flowed out from the corner of her mouth. The female assassin's eyes gradually became dull and lifeless. Slash! Gray pulled out the longsword. The female assassin staggered like a drunkard. Thud! Finally, she fell heavily on the ground. The ground was dyed red by her blood. She twitched a few times and finally stopped moving. After confirming that the female assassin was dead, Gray and the 3 injured guards quickly turned around and rushed towards the assassin who was surrounded by the other 4. The assassin's strength was greatly reduced due to his injuries. Under the siege of Lord Lind and the other 3 guards, he could barely hold on. With the addition of Gray and the other 3, he could no longer hold on. In the end, Lord Lind viciously slashed his neck. Puff! Half of the assassin's neck was chopped off. The rest of his neck drooped down. After twitching a few times, he died. The remaining 8 people split into 2 groups and attacked Viscount Fergus's opponent and the captain's opponent respectively. Damn it! The face of the purple-haired man who was fighting Master Tulu became even more gloomy after seeing 2 of his subordinates being killed. With the shadow ability, they were best at hiding in the dark and assassinating their targets in one hit. But today, before they had the time to launch an assassination, the other party had discovered them and launched a surprise attack on them, causing them to lose their advantage and one of them to be seriously injured on the spot. He couldn't figure out how the enemy discovered them. According to their investigation, there shouldn't be anyone who could see in the dark. But the fact was, the enemy discovered them. There was someone who could see in the dark. Now that 2 of his subordinates were killed, there was no chance of winning. He immediately made a decision. Retreat. After clashing with Master Tulu's weapon, he used the force to retreat. He roared and ordered his remaining 2 subordinates. However, even though they had already received his orders, the 2 assassins who were being besieged did not have the ability to retreat. Humph! He snorted and rushed toward one of his subordinates. Not good, Dodge. Viscount Fergus's expression changed when he sensed it, and he shouted. Even he could only temporarily avoid a berserker, not to mention the other high-ranking berserkers. Whoosh! The purple-haired man was already close, and his dagger was aimed at Viscount Fergus's throat. Viscount Fergus's expression changed slightly, and he waved his sword to block the dagger. He didn't carry a weapon when he was eating. The weapon in his hand belonged to the castle soldiers. Clang! Viscount Fergus kept retreating as his arm went numb. The purple-haired man ignored Viscount Fergus and rushed toward his subordinates to help them out. Puff! One of the guards had already dodged to the side when he heard Viscount Fergus's anxious cries, but he didn't manage to dodge in time. He was directly stabbed in the chest. His eyes became lifeless, and his body collapsed powerlessly. The purple-haired man didn't stop and rushed toward his subordinates. Surprisingly, the one in front of him was green. Whoosh! The purple-haired man's strength was at the level of a berserker. Gray's forehead was dripping with cold sweat. However, Viscount Fergus and that guard delayed him, giving him more time to escape. Coupled with his speed, which was not slow among the upper-level blood warriors, he finally dodged the purple-haired man's attack before it could reach him. Fortunately, the purple-haired man didn't intend to pursue him. After helping his subordinate out, he rushed toward another subordinate. Puff! 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 Master Tulu finally reacted and chased after the purple-haired man. Various kinds of plant branches rushed toward him. The purple-haired man had no choice but to give up on rescuing his remaining subordinate. He took the one he had successfully rescued and rushed out of the castle. The soldiers they encountered along the way were all killed as if they were cutting chives. They couldn't stop them at all. Master Tulu, Viscount Fergus, and Gray's group chased after them. However, when they reached the castle gate and saw the 2 jump over the castle wall and merge into the darkness, they could only give up. The sky was dark and the outside was dark. The 2 had the ability to merge into the shadows. They were like fish in water. It was impossible to track them down. Moreover, if they rushed into the darkness, they could easily be assassinated by the 2. Thus, they could only give up. The group returned to the garden outside the restaurant and joined the besieging of the assassin who couldn't escape. However, when the assassin found that he had nowhere to run, he clenched his teeth and staggered a few times as if he was drunk and fell heavily to the ground. Stepping forward to check, the assassin was shocked to see blood at the corner of his mouth. He was already dead. The blood overflowing from his mouth was pitch black. Clearly, the assassin hid some kind of poison in his teeth. Knowing that he couldn't escape, he killed himself. The group rummaged through the assassin's body, trying to deduce his identity through the items on his body. One of them uncovered the assassin's left arm and saw a pitch-black snake tattoo. The snake's head was raised high, and 2 poisonous fangs were ready to bite. Seeing this black snake tattoo, Viscount Fergus' expression suddenly changed as he cried out in surprise. Chapter 119. Shadow Serpent. It wasn't just Viscount Fergus. Master Tulu and the captain of the Sydney family's guards also had ugly expressions when they saw the pitch-black snake tattoo, and they cried out in alarm. Seeing their expressions, Gray had a bad premonition in his heart and hurriedly asked, "Father, what is the Shadow Serpent?" Hearing Gray's question, Viscount Fergus furrowed his brows and replied after a moment, "This is an extremely vicious assassin organization in the Purple Moon Kingdom. They claim that as long as you pay them, they will accept any assassination commission. As long as you pay them, they will accept any assassination commission." This short sentence made Gray feel the madness of this organization. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. Daring to accept any assassination commission, this seemingly crazy and reckless action, didn't it show the strength and confidence of this organization? If it didn't have the corresponding strength, why would this organization make such a slogan? And now, this assassination organization seemed to have targeted the Fergus family because of the beast-controlling potion. I didn't expect the Shadow Serpent to appear again after so many years. This time, I'm afraid a lot of families have been assassinated, Master Tulu said with a worried expression. A lot of families have been assassinated? Gray looked at Master Tulu with a puzzled expression. Master Tulu, what's going on? This assassination organization's goal isn't the beast-controlling potion this time. It should be, but the beast-controlling potion is only a side effect. The main goal of the Shadow Serpent should be revenge, Master Tulu said with a sullen expression. Revenge? Gray was even more puzzled. From Master Tulu's tone, there seemed to be some kind of conflict between the Shadow Serpent and the nobles of the Sydney Marquis. 20 years ago, there were 7 Viscount families in the Sydney Marquis. Viscount Fergus sighed and said, in addition to the 6 Viscount families, there was also a Viscount family called Kurt. But this Viscount family was destroyed overnight. The one who did it was the Shadow Serpent. Viscount Fergus paused for a moment before continuing. Because of this, the previous Marquis of Sydney was enraged and attacked many of the Shadow Serpent strongholds, causing them to suffer heavy losses. They had no choice but to hide and recover their strength. Now that they have reappeared, they must be planning to take revenge on us, the families who participated in this. They angered the Marquis family of Sydney, but didn't destroy them. Now, they've returned and are ready to take revenge on all the families involved. Gray's face turned slightly pale. From the words of Viscount Fergus, it was not difficult to reveal the strength of this organization. Perhaps this organization was weaker than the Sydney family, but not by much. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to escape from the Sydney family and sneak into Marquis Sydney's territory for revenge. Everyone headed to the basement with heavy hearts and met up with Bernal and the others. When they talked about the assassination from the Shadow Serpent, as well as the past between this organization and Marquis Sydney's territory, everyone's expression changed. Their joy from repelling the assassins instantly disappeared. If the Shadow Serpent and Marquis Sydney's territory really had such a deep grudge, then this assassination was probably just the beginning and was far from over. Afraid that the assassins would return, everyone slept in the basement for the night. The next day, in the living room of Fergus Castle, the Fergus family, Master Tulu, Polly, and the remaining 6 guards of the Sydney family were all present. News from all over the Marquis Sydney's territory came one after another through messenger birds. Each piece of news was shocking. The Baron Biller family which was in theft by the Sidney family, was assassinated. Baron Biller was assassinated. All the direct descendants of the Biller family were killed. The Biller family was destroyed. Baron Rupert's family was assassinated. Baron Robert was assassinated. All the direct descendants of the Robert family were killed. No one survived. The Robert family was destroyed. Viscount Lycan's family was assassinated. The assassins were repelled by the Lycan's family. Viscount Locke's family was assassinated. Viscount Locke was injured. Viscount Bessemer's family was assassinated. The assassins were repelled by the Viscount Bessemer's family. Viscount Pry's family was assassinated. Viscount Pry was assassinated. All the direct descendants of the Pry family were killed. The Pry family was destroyed. Viscount Smalley's family was assassinated. Viscount Smalley's family was lightly injured. The assassins were repelled by the Smalley family. Viscount Ford's family was assassinated. The assassins were repelled by the Ford family. 3 baronial families have already been destroyed. In the corner of the living room, Gray's expression was solemn. Up until now, they had already received news of 3 baronial families being destroyed. In addition, they had also received news of many families being attacked and injured. Sure enough, as Master Tulu had said last night, many families have been assassinated. The Shadow Serpent was indeed here to take revenge on the nobles of Marquis Sidney. Up until now, from the lowest baronial families to the highest count families, they had all been assassinated. The strength of this organization could be seen at a glance. There are at least 3 Berserker powerhouses. In the Shadow Serpent, there were at least 3 Berserker powerhouses, or even more. The purple-haired man who had escaped from Fergus Castle yesterday was one of them. The leader of the assassins who had assassinated the Ford and Smalley families should also have the strength of a Berserker. After all, whether it was Viscount Ford or Count Smalley, they were both Berserkers. To assassinate the two, their strength had to be at least at the Berserker level. There should be at least 10 Berserkers at the Berserker level. On the Fergus family side, 4 Berserkers had appeared. In addition to those who had assassinated the 2 Count families and several Viscount families, there were definitely more than 10 Berserkers at the Berserker level. That is to say, the Shadow Serpent has at least 3 Berserkers and more than 10 Berserkers. Gray immediately felt his scalp go numb after coming up with this estimation of his lowest strength. This strength was already not weak. Although it couldn't be compared to the Sidney family, it was still quite close. Moreover, this was only the lowest strength of the Shadow Serpent. Although there hadn't been any Berserker-level assassins so far, it didn't mean that there wasn't such a possibility. Asterisk thump, thump, thump. Asterisk the sound of hurried footsteps approached the living room. Butler Nick pushed open the door and entered, holding a folded letter in his hand. He respectfully handed it to Viscount Fergus. Viscount Fergus took the letter and opened it. The next moment, his face was filled with astonishment, and he didn't say anything for a long time. "Father, what's the news?" Seeing Viscount Fergus like this, Bernal couldn't help but ask anxiously. Everyone also looked over. Viscount Fergus came back to his senses and said with a grave expression, "Viscount Shelley was assassinated and all the direct descendants of the Shelley family were killed. That is to say, the Shelley family has been destroyed." Asterisk boom. Asterisk, as if there was a sudden clap of thunder. Everyone in the living room was shocked. Just like Viscount Fergus, no one said anything for a long time. Viscount Shelley family has been destroyed. The first Viscount family to be destroyed has appeared. Gray's heart was beating wildly. When he heard that the Baron family had been destroyed, he wondered if the Viscount family would be destroyed as well. But now, there really was a Viscount family that had been destroyed. Without a doubt, the revenge of the Shadow Serpent was far more fierce than expected. The Shelley family has been destroyed. Bornel's expression was complicated. Originally, because of the fight for the title of Count, the Fergus family and the other Viscount families have been fighting openly and secretly for many years. Their relationship could be said to be like fire and water. They couldn't wait for the other Viscount families to be destroyed so that there would be one less competitor. But at this moment, he didn't feel the slightest bit of schadenfreude. Although the position of Count was good, he still needed to be able to survive. If he couldn't survive the assassination of the shadow snake, everything else would be in vain. The Shelley family has been destroyed. Polly lightly covered her red lips, her eyes wide open. Last night, she heard that the assassins came from the shadow serpent, and that the Fergus family wasn't the only family that had been attacked. Although she felt uneasy, she still had a trace of hope. Perhaps this was just the shadow serpent's action against the beast controlling medicine. Perhaps the other families hadn't been attacked. But since this morning, the news that came one after another broke her hope. News of families being attacked came one after another, and then 3 barren families were destroyed. And now, even a Viscount family had been wiped out. One had to know that the Viscount family was not a small family, even in the Sydney Marquis-dom, but it was still wiped out. One could only imagine the severity of the Shadow Serpent's attack this time. In the living room, Master Tulu frowned. The captain of the Sydney family's guards had a solemn expression. Madame de Milan's face was slightly pale and stiff. Sarah's body trembled slightly. Gray couldn't help but put his hand on her shoulder and softly comforted her. Everyone's expression was solemn and dignified. News came one after another, but they were all bad news. Dong dong dong. Chapter 120. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk everyone's eyes couldn't help but follow the movement of the letter. Their eyes were filled with nervousness as they were afraid of hearing more bad news. Though Viscount Fergus couldn't help but take a deep breath before reaching out to take the letter. He quickly opened it and looked at it. A moment later, he raised his head and spoke under everyone's nervous gaze. The Marquis has already sent a team of guards to Fergus Castle. They are expected to arrive this afternoon and escort Master Tulu and Miss Polly back to the Sydney Castle. In the living room, there were clear sighs of relief. They were really afraid of hearing more bad news. Fortunately, it wasn't bad news. Apart from that. But at this moment, Viscount Fergus spoke again. Everyone's relaxed hearts couldn't help but be in suspense again as they looked at Viscount Fergus. The Marquis is furious about the Shadow Serpent's assassination this time. He has already formed a search and kill team with the families of 2 counts. He has requested all noble families to cooperate with the search and find traces of the Shadow Serpent. Hearing this, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. The search and pursuit team formed by the Sydney family and the 2 Earls families was undoubtedly powerful. With such a powerful team as a deterrent, presumably even a shadow snake wouldn't be as rampant as last night. Next, they only needed to find traces of the shadow snake and destroy the shadow snake assassins that sneaked into Marquis Sydney's territory. They should be able to survive this crisis. At noon, the Fergus family had already carried out Marquis Sydney's order and began to search all over the territory to find traces of the shadow snake. In the evening, the guards from the Sydney family arrived. The second day, in the morning, under the escort of the Sydney family's reinforcements, Master Tulu and Polly left Fergus Castle in a carriage with 2 horses. In the afternoon, Viscount Fergus's study. Viscount Fergus, Bernal, and Gray were sitting inside. "Father, we've searched every corner of the territory. We found traces of the Shadow Serpent in Fergus City, but they've already retreated. They should be the assassins from last night. As for other places, we haven't found any traces of the Shadow Serpent." Bernal spoke. Viscount Fergus had arranged for him to be in charge of the search for the Shadow Serpent. Of course, even though he said he was in charge, he was only in the castle. Under the heavy protection of the soldiers, he was responsible for arranging the search in the various regions of the territory, receiving and gathering the results of the search from various places in the territory. Yes, Viscount Fergus nodded. He wasn't surprised by this outcome. If the Shadow Snake's traces were easy to find, then they wouldn't be called Shadow Snake, as an assassin organization. "Father, if we search for the Shadow Serpent with all our strength, won't the Shadow Serpent hate us and come to assassinate us again?" Thinking of the assassins that appeared last night, Bernal worriedly asked. "We are already mortal enemies with the Shadow Snake. Even if we don't cooperate with the Marquis, the Shadow Snake won't let us go." Viscount Fergus shook his head. "And now, the Marquis and the 2 Earls have formed a hunting team to deal with the Shadow Snake. The Shadow Snake won't dare to act rashly. They're also worried that this might be a trap, so they can only search boldly. I understand, Bernal respectfully replied. Viscount Fergus nodded, then looked at Gray and asked, Gray, do you remember the two blood warriors of the Oliver family who tried to assassinate you in the Stone Forest? I remember. One of them was killed by you on the spot, and the other escaped. If I'm not wrong, this person should be that person called Hank. Although Gray was puzzled as to why Viscount Fergus would ask such a question, he still answered. That's right. The one who escaped is this person. His name is Hank Jason, a lord of the Oliver family. Viscount Fergus nodded, confirming Gray's guess. Father, is something the matter? Gray didn't quite understand why Viscount Fergus would suddenly mention it after such a long time. Yes, Viscount Fergus nodded, looking solemnly at Gray. I want you to kill this person. Kill this person? At a time like this? Gray frowned. The crisis of the shadow snake was like a fishbone stuck in his throat. At a time like this, Viscount Fergus actually wanted him to kill the person who tried to assassinate him. Although he really wanted to kill this person, after all, this person had almost taken his life in the past. Furthermore, he wasn't magnanimous enough to forgive a person who had wanted to kill him in the past. However, he felt that the timing wasn't right. Yes, Father, now is not the time to attract attention. Although Gray already has the strength of a blood warrior. If he's alone, Bernal also frowned. No, now is the right time to push this matter to the shadow snake. Viscount Fergus shook his head. Naturally, he's not the only one involved in the assassination. I'll get others to cooperate with him. Of course. At this point, Viscount Fergus paused slightly and looked at Gray. In the end, it still depends on your willingness. If you're not willing, I naturally won't force you. However, I think you can consider it, because this is an opportunity for you to fight with someone of the same level. Gray frowned slightly, carefully considering this matter. After a moment, his brows relaxed, and he said, I'm willing. Indeed, the assassination of the Shadow Snake had just happened. Even if he killed this person, it was very likely that the Shadow Snake would be suspected, and not the Fergus family who had a grudge against him. Moreover, as Viscount Fergus said, this was indeed an opportunity for him to fight with someone of the same level. Of course, the most important thing was that he really wanted to kill this person with his own hands. After all, this person had once almost taken his life. Okay. Seeing Gray agree, Viscount Fergus smiled and suddenly clapped his hands. Come in. Creak. The door of the study was pushed open and a man in a cloak walked in. The man had a white face and no beard. Most of his face was covered under the cloak. After entering the room, he bowed and said, Greetings, Lord Viscount. Greetings, young Master Bernal. Greetings, young Master Gray. Gray and Bernal both cautiously sized up this man who had suddenly appeared. Although he was shrouded under the cloak, from the vague silhouette, they could feel that the man's body should be extremely robust. If there were no surprises, this person was most likely someone who had practiced blood techniques, and his strength should be quite good. Nodding slightly to the cloaked man, Viscount Fergus looked at Gray and Bernal and said, It's time for you to understand. You should know that every family has some hidden strength. Our Fergus family also has a hidden team of a few dozen people. His name is Ike, and he's the captain of this team. In the team, he has the strength of an upper-level blood warrior. In addition, there are 2 vice-captains who are middle-level blood warriors. The rest are elite soldiers whose strength is close to, or even close to that of a lower-level blood warrior. Elite soldiers whose strength is close to, or even close to that of a lower-level blood warrior. Gray asked doubtfully. Their strength was close to, or even close to that of a lower-level blood warrior, but they were called soldiers. This made Gray slightly puzzled. Yes, they're not blood warriors, but elite soldiers. Viscount Fergus nodded as he explained. Although it's difficult for an ordinary person without a bloodline to reach the strength of a lower-level blood warrior, it's still possible. Everyone in this hidden team of the Fergus family came to be like this, including Ike and the other 2 middle-level blood warriors who were vice-captains. But in consideration of their sincerity, we implanted bloodlines in them and made them blood warriors. No wonder some of the warriors whose strength is comparable to that of a lower-level blood warrior in the territory suddenly disappeared. It turns out that they were recruited into this team by you, Father. Bernal revealed a look of understanding. After all, he had grown up in Fergus Castle and had vaguely heard some rumors. Do they all practice the blood technique? Windwolf. Dozens of elite soldiers whose strength was at least close to that of a lower-level blood warrior. Thinking that the Fergus family still had such a hidden force, Gray was slightly surprised and asked, "No, the blood technique they practice is Shadow Bug." Viscount Fergus shook his head. "Speaking of which, this blood technique is the blood technique practiced by the Shadow Serpent Assassins. The Fergus family accidentally obtained it over 20 years ago when they were encircling and suppressing the Shadow Serpent Assassins. The blood technique of the Shadow Serpent." Gray instantly understood Viscount Fergus's intentions. Since they practiced the same blood technique as the Shadow Serpent, there must be similarities in their combat methods. Going with such a group of people to assassinate, even if they failed, the target of suspicion would inevitably be the Shadow Serpent, and not the Fergus family. "All right, Gray, go and get ready. Then you'll go with them." Viscount Fergus ordered Gray. Then he looked at Edge and said, "Don't worry. Although Gray is already an upper-level blood warrior, he still lacks experience. You will still be the leader this time." Gray and the pale-faced, beardless man, Ike, both nodded in response. Gray wasn't dissatisfied that he wasn't the leader. If it had been another 17-year-old genius who had become an upper-level blood warrior, he would have been dissatisfied even if he had agreed at this time. But Gray had the soul of an adult in his body after all, and he still had a sense of the bigger picture. After Gray left to make preparations, Viscount Fergus looked at Ike again and spoke seriously. "Protect Gray. Even if the mission fails, you must ensure his safety." "Yes, I will definitely bring young Master Gray back safely." Chapter 121. Gray put on his battle armor, picked up his longsword, and put on a cloak. He left Fergus Castle with a man called Edge. They rode around Fergus City and entered a small village after half an hour. Captain, the small village should be the stronghold of this hidden force of the Fergus family." When the two of them arrived at the village, many strong-looking people appeared and greeted Edge. They also looked curiously at Gray. Edge nodded and led Gray into a house built with stone slabs. There were two men in the house. One of the men had dark skin and short, gray-brown hair. The other man's head was bald and shiny, as if it could reflect light like a mirror. "Young Master Gray, these are the other two captains. This is What, and this is Kim." Gray nodded and greeted the two. "Greetings. This is young Master Gray." Then, Edge introduced Gray to the two of them. "Young Master Gray." The two felt a little strange after hearing this. They didn't understand why Gray would appear here, but they still bowed respectfully to Gray. "Captain, is there a mission?" What, the short-haired, dark-skinned man asked. "Yes, the Viscount ordered us to assassinate Hank Jason from Viscount Oliver's territory tonight. Young Master Gray is already an upper-level blood warrior. He will also participate in this assassination mission." Edge nodded. "Upper-level blood warrior?" The short-haired, dark-skinned man, What, and the bald man, Kim, looked at each other with shock in their eyes. It was rumored that young Master Gray was the most talented person in the Fergus family. It seemed that it was true. He was so young, but he was already an upper-level blood warrior. "Captain, shall I get the brothers to prepare?" The short-haired, dark-skinned man, What, said. He did not say that Gray would drag them down or anything like that. What kind of joke was that? Would an upper-level blood warrior drag them down when most of them were lower-level blood warriors, or even people who did not even have the strength of a lower-level blood warrior? This was because the captain was an upper-level blood warrior, and they were well aware of the strength of an upper-level blood warrior. With this kind of strength, even if they did not have the corresponding assassination experience, their performance would not be any weaker than middle-level blood warriors like them. "All right, go ahead." Edge nodded. Naturally, he had intentionally mentioned Gray's strength as an upper-level blood warrior. As a team, trust was the most basic. If they didn't trust each other during the operation and didn't dare to leave their backs to their companions, it could lead to failure. He had pointed out Gray's strength as an upper-level blood warrior to reassure them that Gray would not be a burden to them. Half an hour later, a group of more than 30 people, including Gray, left the village and rode towards the Oliver family in the east. An hour later, they arrived at the border between the Fergus family and the Oliver family. In order to avoid causing too much of a ruckus, they stopped their horses at the border and left a few people to watch over the horses. They walked into Viscount Oliver's territory. Of the people present, the weakest was close to a lower-level blood warrior, so their speed was naturally not slow. When the sun went down, they avoided the crowd and arrived at the residence near the Jason family. The Jason family was a noble family. They had 7 villages and 1 small town as their fief. The Jason family was located in the center of the small town, and they were now in the bushes outside the small town. Young Master Gray, the small town is too small. Once outsiders appear, they will immediately be discovered. Therefore, I plan to wait until nightfall before entering. Beside Gray, Edge explained to Gray. Although Viscount Fergus had already said that he would still be the leader of the team, Gray was the young master of the Fergus family after all. Naturally, he had to ask for his opinion. Captain Edge, you can make the arrangements. Father told me to listen to your arrangements for this operation. Gray naturally understood that he should listen to the arrangements of a professional at a time like this. Yes, seeing that Gray had no intention of giving orders, Edge let out a sigh of relief. He didn't care about the control of the team, but he was worried that Gray didn't have any assassination experience. If he gave some inappropriate orders, it wouldn't be good if he didn't listen, but it also wouldn't be good if he did. Now it seemed that this young master didn't have the arrogance of a typical genius disciple. Instead, he was unusually mature and steady. As night fell, a purple crescent moon appeared in the sky. It sprinkled down strands of purple moonlight, covering the small town in a layer of hazy purple light. In the small town, every household had closed their doors and windows. Through the seams of the doors and windows, bits and pieces of light shone through. "Let's go," Edge called out and took the lead to walk out of the bushes that concealed their figures, slowly sneaking towards the small town. Everyone, including Gray, also walked out of the bushes and followed behind him. At this time, everyone's heads were covered with a black cloth cover. The cover covered their entire heads, except for 3 holes where the eyes and mouth were. With the purple moonlight illuminating, everyone walked along the road in the small town, trying not to make too much noise as they walked towards the center of the town. The small town with less than 1,000 people wasn't big. In just a few minutes, a building appeared in their line of sight. This building was much bigger than the other buildings in the small town. It took up a few thousand square meters and was surrounded by a 3-meter-tall stone wall. This was the residence of the Jason family. "Stop!" Raising his hand to signal everyone to stop, Edge moved towards the wall alone. After getting close to the wall, he jumped lightly and grabbed the top of the wall with his hand. He nimbly flipped over and jumped onto the wall. The whole process was silent. Even Gray and the others, who had been paying attention to him, did not hear any sound. On top of the wall, he looked around and waved his hand to signal everyone to follow him. Then, he nimbly jumped down the wall and entered the inner part of the wall. Gray and the others approached the wall and used their own methods to jump over the wall and enter the building. Gray, Kim, and What jumped lightly. Just like Edge, they flipped over the wall and entered the inner part of the wall. The others, on the other hand, were in groups of 2. One of them acted as a stepping stone while the other used it to climb up the wall. Then on the wall, they pulled their partner up and jumped down the wall to enter the inner part of the wall. Although they were only lords, they were still nobles. There were soldiers patrolling the inner part of the town. The 2 patrolling soldiers didn't even have time to make a sound before their mouths were covered and their necks were broken by the people who discovered them. "Kim, take a group of people and clear out the patrolling soldiers. Be careful not to make too much noise." Seeing that everyone had passed through the wall, Edge whispered to the bald man, Kim. "Yes." The bald man, Kim, immediately took a dozen people and left. The rest, including Gray, followed Edge's lead and sneaked into the brightest part of the building. Just as they were about to get close, Edge gestured for everyone to stop. He "What?" And Gray slowly approached. Gray approached the window where the lights were the brightest. He tilted his head slightly and looked inside through the colorful window. He saw that in a room that was about 100 square meters, there was a round table. There were 3 people sitting around a round table: a middle-aged man, a middle-aged woman, and a young man. There was a steak in front of each of them. It was obvious that they were enjoying dinner. "It's him." From where Gray was standing, he could just make out the middle-aged man's face. It was a skinny man with brown eyes. Gray recognized this middle-aged man at a glance. It was Hank Jason, the man who had tried to assassinate him. He couldn't help but squint and snort in his heart. All 3 of them are here. Just nice. The reason why they chose to sneak in as soon as night fell, and not in the dead of the night, was to choose the time when the 3 of them were together. Although the dead of the night was the time when one's guard was at its lowest, it was easy for the other targets to be alerted and run away because of their unsynchronized movements. Moreover, because they didn't know the internal structure of the Jason residence, they didn't know which room was Hank Jason's room. They couldn't arrange for assassins. If they were unlucky and the assassins were too weak, they would be killed by Hank Jason instead. Therefore, they chose the time when they could accurately find their targets at night. "I'll break the window and enter. Young Master Gray, and what will break the door and enter?" Edge pointed at the window and the door and signaled to Gray and Watt. Gray and Watt both nodded knowingly and sneaked toward the door. Crack! Bang! The sound of glass shattering and the door being kicked open sounded at almost the same time. Then, Gray and the other 2 quickly rushed into the room and pounced on their respective targets. Gray and Edge assassinated Hank Jason together, while Watt assassinated the young man and the middle-aged woman. As for the others outside, they killed the soldiers and servants who rushed over after hearing the commotion. "Who's there?" The sudden, huge commotion caused the expressions of the 3 people eating in the room to change. Hank Jason stood up abruptly and shouted. What answered him was Edge's jet-black long knife, which quickly slashed toward his neck. Oomph! He lifted the round table, and the dinner on it scattered all over the floor. Then, he used the round table as a weapon and smashed it toward Edge. Slash! The round table was split into 2 halves, but Ike was also temporarily stopped by the round table that came crashing down. Whoosh! At this moment, a flash of sword light suddenly appeared and quickly slashed toward Hank Jason. The deep white body of the sword flickered under the light, like a biting, cold light. Chapter 122. Clang! The sound of metal colliding rang out. Just as Gray Sword was about to hit Hank Jason suddenly bent down and pulled out 2 short knives from his legs, crossing them in front of the sword. Because he had participated in many assassinations, he had always been very careful about his own safety. Unless he was sleeping, he would never leave his weapon. However, in the next moment, he felt a huge force coming from the short knives. His body couldn't help but be pushed back. The strength of the other party's attack was beyond his imagination. It was much stronger than his own, and his hands were slightly numb from the impact. On the other side, What pounced on the young man and the middle-aged woman with his short knives. Swish, swish. The young man had trained in blood techniques, and under Hank Jason's influence, he also had the habit of keeping his weapon by his side. When he saw what coming at him, he pulled out 2 short knives and charged at What. Clang! However, as soon as they exchanged blows, he was directly sent flying and smashed into a wooden chair. The wooden chair was completely smashed into pieces. The young man was only a lower-level blood warrior, while What was already a middle-level blood warrior. Naturally, he was no match for What. Garth! The middle-aged woman shouted anxiously. The young man was sent flying by Watt's knife. However, her shout quickly turned into a scream because What had already slit her neck. Blood spurted out, and the middle-aged woman fell heavily. Mother! The young man roared angrily, getting up and pouncing at What. Clang, clang, puff. After all, there was a difference in strength. After only 2 moves, Watt's knife had slashed his stomach. His stomach was dyed red. Lillian Garth! Hank Jason roared angrily, holding 2 short knives. He pounced at What with a murderous aura, but he was stopped by Gray coldly. Staring at Hank Jason, Gray's gaze was cold. Since he dared to participate in the assassination, he must have been prepared to be assassinated. Even now, Gray still couldn't forget the fear he felt when he struggled to escape under the arrow shot by this man, but he couldn't. As for Hank Jason's wife and son, although he was very sorry, but for the sake of the future, he could only let them die. If there was anyone to blame, it could only be Hank Jason. He didn't want there to be a scene of him avenging his husband and father many years later. Although he wasn't afraid, the people around him were. Therefore, he could only eliminate them here. Bastard. Seeing Gray blocking his way, Hank Jason's murderous aura overflowed as if he had gone mad. The two daggers in his hands were like two cold glints of light, moving erratically as they slashed towards Gray. Whoosh! Gray's gaze was cold. The long sword in his hand fiercely slashed down. In the room, it was as if a strong wind was blowing. Clank! With a flash of cold light, the dagger was blocked by the long sword, and Hank Jason was once again pushed back by the huge force transmitted from Gray's sword. But at this time, when Hank Jason was pushed back, he turned the dagger in his other hand into a dart and threw it at Gray. His eyes were full of madness. Oomph! Gray snorted coldly. With a slight sidestep, he had already dodged the dart dagger. Hank Jason's use of the dagger as a dart surprised Gray. Actual combat was indeed different from ordinary battles. In a life-and-death battle, the opponent often didn't play by the rules. But Gray had the speed characteristic of the Wind Wolf. His speed was far superior to that of an ordinary high-rank blood warrior, and he easily dodged. Moreover, he chased after Hank Jason. His long sword moved from bottom to top, and he slashed diagonally. Puffed. Blood splattered as an arm flew high into the air. It fell to the ground and rolled a few times before coming to a stop. Hank Jason's right arm was severed at the shoulder. Bright red blood kept spilling out, dyeing half of his clothes red. It was like water from a faucet that couldn't be turned off, quickly spilling onto the ground. With Gray's current strength, even among high-rank blood warriors, he was known for his valiance. In addition, Ike, who was attacking Hank Jason together with him, was also a high-rank blood warrior. Therefore, in just 3 moves, he had already crippled one of Hank Jason's arms. With his right arm severed, Hank Jason was in so much pain that cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He kept retreating. At this moment, Ike appeared behind Hank Jason and slashed out with his long sword. Feeling the strong wind coming from behind him, Hank Jason's expression changed as he dodged to the side. A wooden chair was split in half, and he narrowly avoided it. However, before he could breathe a sigh of relief, a sword flashed again. He tried his best to dodge to the side, but he still couldn't avoid the pain in his left shoulder. Looking up, he saw a bloody wound on his left shoulder. Bright red blood dyed the other half of his body red. The only thing he was thankful for was that he had dodged slightly to the side just now and managed to save his left arm. He retreated in a sorry state until he almost hit the wall. He roared angrily. "Who the hell are you people? What kind of enmity do you have with the Jason family?" At this moment, he could hear the sounds of fighting outside. Obviously, the 3 assassins in the restaurant weren't the only ones. There were many more. He couldn't help but feel despair. Just the 3 in the restaurant were enough to make it difficult for them to resist. If the people outside came in, there would be no match for them. He looked at his son, Garth, with even more hatred. At this moment, there were several wounds on Garth's body. His clothes were almost completely dyed red with blood, and the ground was full of his dripping blood. Although he still had the strength to fight, anyone with a discerning eye could see that if this continued, Garth would be killed in a few moves. "You don't need to know." Ike snorted coldly. He stomped on the ground and leaped high. The long sword in his hand slashed down from above. Crash! Hank Jason awkwardly rolled to the side, dodging the long blade, but the long blade left a deep crack on the wall, stone fragments splashing everywhere. Swish! After dodging the long sword, Hank Jason found another sword coming and could only raise his short sword to block. Clang! Hank Jason was forced to retreat again. Puff! At this moment, Ike's long sword slashed, and a deep wound appeared on his back. Bright red blood flowed continuously. "You're the Shadow Snakes?" Hank Jason asked angrily as he rolled and dodged Ike's second slash. "So what if we are?" Although Ike was speaking, his long saber was slashing at Hank Jason again and again. Don't kill us, our lord and your shadow snakes. Halfway through, Hank Jason suddenly stopped and angrily said, "What? No, you're not the shadow snakes." He suddenly remembered that when he fought with Gray's strength clearly surpassed that of an ordinary high blood warrior. This wasn't a characteristic of an assassin of the shadow snakes. Chapter 123. What is the relationship between your lord and the shadow serpent? Gray took a few steps forward and surrounded Hank Jason with edge, preventing him from escaping. Gray looked at Hank Jason and asked. Originally, they had disguised themselves as the shadow serpent, but they had unexpectedly heard news about the real shadow serpent. Moreover, it seemed to be related to the Oliver family. This shocked him greatly. Your voice? Who are you? Hank Jason looked at Gray in surprise. Because of the hood and the fact that Gray had displayed the strength of a high-ranked blood warrior, he had always thought that Gray was an adult. But now that he heard Gray's voice, he could not help but be shocked. The other party's voice was excessively young and did not sound like an adult's voice. You don't need to know. Speak. What is the relationship between the Oliver family and the shadow serpent? Gray did not intend to answer the other party's doubts and continued to speak coldly. At this moment, the young Garth was kicked down by What, and a dagger was placed on his neck. When Hank Jason saw this, he immediately became anxious. His expression kept changing as he gritted his teeth. I can tell you, but you have to let us go. Edge raised his eyebrows and looked at Gray. Originally, their mission was to assassinate Hank Jason, but they had unexpectedly obtained information related to the shadow serpent. Moreover, the other party had used this information to threaten them. This made him feel that it was a bit difficult. The information about the shadow serpent was indeed important, but the assassination mission was equally important. After all, it would not be easy to assassinate after this. From Edge's gaze, Hank Jason could tell that Gray should be someone of high status in this team. He could not help but look hopefully at Gray. I don't know which family you belong to, but this information is enough for you to make a contribution to the Marquis. Let my son go first, and then I will tell you the information. Gray pondered for a moment, then looked at Hank Jason and said, I refuse. As he said this, Gray moved. Whoosh! The power of blood poured into his legs, causing them to suddenly expand. In an instant, he had crossed the distance between him and Hank Jason. His long sword was like a flash of cold light. Gray's sudden approach made Hank Jason's heart sink. He knew that things weren't going well and hurriedly used his remaining left hand to raise the dagger to block. However, before he could raise his dagger, a cold light had already swept across his arm. Puff! Hank Jason's remaining left arm was severed from the wrist, blood spurting out. Hank Jason groaned in pain and hurriedly dodged to the side. On the other hand, Gray faced the spurting blood, threw down the long sword in his hand, and quickly rushed forward. Pung! Hank Jason, who was trying to dodge, was kicked to the ground by Gray. He could no longer move. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't move an inch. After all, in terms of strength, Hank Jason was obviously inferior to Gray. Tell me, what is the relationship between the Oliver family and the Shadow Serpent? Gray pressed as he stepped on Hank Jason's body. Making a deal with Hank Jason to obtain information on the relationship between the Oliver family and the Shadow Serpent. This plan flashed through his mind, but he gave up on it. Even if the deal was successful and he did obtain information on the relationship between the Oliver family and the Shadow Serpent, it would definitely alert the Oliver family and make targeted arrangements. At that time, whether or not this information would be useful was another matter. As for pretending to release Garth and then deceiving Hank Jason into telling him the information, how could Hank Jason not be prepared for such a method? He would definitely have a way to confirm whether or not Garth had really escaped. Therefore, he chose to capture Hank Jason and force out the relevant information. Cough, cough. Do you think I will tell you in this situation? Being stepped on by Gray, Hank Jason, who was coughing continuously, raised his head and looked at Gray with a venomous gaze, coldly snorting. Do you guys have any means of interrogation? Gray turned to look at Edge and asked. We do. Young master, do you want to interrogate him here? Edge nodded and asked. No need. Bring him back and ask him. Gray shook his head. The commotion caused by the fight had probably alarmed the people in the town. They had to evacuate as soon as possible. "Young master, what do we do with this guy?" What pointed at the young man who he had a knife at his neck and asked. "Take him away." Considering that this young man would be useful if he couldn't get the information out of him, Gray decided not to kill him for the time being. Then, he thought for a moment and ordered, "Gather all the corpses here. Find someone with a similar build to Hank Jason and his son. Wear their clothes, and then set them on fire." What nodded in understanding. Gray's purpose in doing this was to mislead the Oliver family into thinking that Hank Jason and his son had been killed. A few minutes later, a raging fire ignited in the dining hall. The dozens of corpses, including the guards and servants, were doused in grease and set ablaze. Gray and the others took Hank Jason and his son, who were tied up and gagged, out of the town. They even took Hank Jason's 2 severed arms with them. The commotion caused by the fight had already alarmed the town, but almost no one opened the door to check the situation. The people of this world knew how to seek good fortune and avoid disaster. Just from the sounds of the fight, they could guess that it wasn't a good thing, so almost no one opened the door to check the situation. This saved them a lot of trouble. If they were really seen, Gray and the others could only kill them. Taking advantage of the darkness, they carefully left Viscount Oliver's territory without leaving a trace. Then, they rode a horse back to the village where Gray and the others had set off from. It was already past midnight. Gray took a bath to wash away the smell of blood on his body and was arranged to rest in a decent bedroom in the village. The next morning, Gray was eating breakfast in a simple dining hall when Edge hurriedly appeared. He had dark circles under his eyes. Obviously, he hadn't slept at all last night because he was interrogating Hank Jason. "Young Master Gray." Seeing Gray, he bowed respectfully, his attitude even more respectful than yesterday. Last night, the strength that Gray had displayed was the genuine strength of a high-ranked blood warrior. Moreover, what shocked him most was that the other party's battle prowess was clearly stronger than his, someone who had been a high-ranked blood warrior for many years. In the entire battle, he, who should have been the main force, had been reduced to a supporting role. The one who had cut off Hank Jason's arms was Gray, and the one who had captured Hank Jason was also Gray. "How is it? Did you get the information out of him?" Gray hurriedly asked. Speaking of the information regarding the Oliver family and the Shadow Serpent, Edge's expression became serious. "I got the information out of him, but I don't dare to confirm if this information is true." At this point, he paused slightly. Clearly, he didn't dare to confirm the information that he had gotten out of him. "What information is it?" Gray asked doubtfully. According to Hank Jason's guess, the Shadow Serpent might be hiding in Viscount Oliver's territory, Edge said with a strange expression. "The Shadow Serpent is hiding in Viscount Oliver's territory? Is it possible?" Gray's expression was suddenly shocked, and he couldn't help but stand up. The shock of this news was no less than the news that Viscount Shelley's family had been destroyed by the Shadow Serpent, or even more. What kind of power was the Shadow Serpent? It was an assassination organization that had angered the Marquis family of Sydney and was the public enemy of all the nobles in Marquis Sydney's territory. The Oliver family actually dared to hide the Shadow Serpent's assassins in their territory. If they were discovered, they would definitely be destroyed by the Marquis. Why would the Oliver family do this? Forcefully suppressing the shock in his heart, Gray raised his eyebrows and asked again. "You just said that this was Hank Jason's guess. What do you mean?" "The Oliver family didn't intend to let him know. He only found out by chance." Edgar explained. When he went to the Oliver family to report the situation, he found a group of strangers in the Oliver family, and he unexpectedly saw a black snake tattoo on the left arm of one of them. "Did you confirm with him whether it was the black snake tattoo of the Shadow Serpent, and not something similar?" Gray asked with a frown. "I've confirmed it. According to his description, it is indeed the black snake tattoo of the Shadow Serpent." Edge nodded with certainty. "Young Master Gray, we need to inform the Viscount as soon as possible." "Yes, the impact of this matter is too great, and we need to inform Father as soon as possible. Find a carriage, bring Father and son, and return to Fergus Castle with me." Gray nodded and ordered,